I suppose, Senator, that you have become acclimated to this country. Well, said the vice president, crossing his legs, pulling his wide-awake down over his forehead, causing a passing chicken to hop quickly one side by the accuracy of his aim, and speaking with senatorial deliberation, I think I have. I've been here 25 years, and dash my dash to dash, if I haven't entertained 25 separate and distinct earthquakes, one a year. The Negro is the only person who can stand the fever and ague of this region. The convalescence of the engineer was the signal for breaking up quarters at St. Louis, and the young fortune hunters started up the river in good spirits. It was only the second time either of them had been upon a Mississippi steamboat, and nearly everything they saw had the charm of novelty. Carl Sellers was at the landing to bid them goodbye. I shall send you up that basket of champagne by the next boat. No, thanks, you'll find it not bad in camp, he cried out as the plank was hauled in. My respects to Thompson, tell him to sight for Stone S. Let me know, Mr. Brierly, when you're ready to locate. I'll come over from Hawkeye. Goodbye. And the last the young fellows saw of the colonel, he was waving his hat and beaming prosperity and good luck. The voyage was delightful and was not long enough to become monotonous. The travelers scarcely had time indeed to get accustomed to the splendors of the great saloon where the tables were spread for meals, a marvel of paint and gilding, its ceiling hung with fancifully cut tissue paper of many colors, festooned and arranged in endless patterns. The whole was more beautiful than a barber's shop. The printed bill of fare at dinner was longer and more varied, the proprietors justly boasted, than that of any hotel in New York. It must have been the work of an author of talent and imagination, and it surely was not his fault if the dinner itself was to a certain extent a delusion, and if the guests got something that tasted pretty much the same whatever dish they ordered. Nor was it his fault if a general flavor of rose in all the dessert dishes suggested that they had passed through the barber's saloon on their way from the kitchen. The travelers landed at a little settlement on the left bank, and at once took horses for the camp in the interior, carrying their clothes and blankets strapped behind the saddles. Harry was dressed as we have seen him once before, and his long and shining boots attracted not a little the attention of the few persons they met on the road, and especially of the bright-faced wenches who lightly stepped along the highway, picturesque in their colored kerchiefs, carrying light baskets, or riding upon mules and balancing before them a heavier load. Harry sang fragments of operas and talked about their fortune. Philip even was excited by the sense of freedom and adventure and the beauty of the landscape. The prairie, with its new grass and unending acres of brilliant flowers, chiefly the innumerable varieties of phlox, bore the look of years of cultivation, and the occasional open groves of white oaks gave it a park-like appearance. It was hardly unreasonable to expect to see at any moment the gables and square windows of an Elizabethan mansion in one of the well-kept groves. Towards sunset of the third day, when the young gentlemen thought they ought to be near the town of Magnolia, near which they had been directed to find the engineers' camp, they descried a log house and drew up before it to inquire the way. Half the building was store, and half was dwelling house. At the door of the latter stood a negress with a bright turban on her head, to whom Philip called. "Can you tell me, auntie, how far it is to the town of Magnolia?" "Why, bless you, Chilly," laughed the woman, "you's dara now." It was true, this log house was the compactly built town, and all creation was its suburbs. The engineers' camp was only 2 or 3 miles distant. "You's bound to find it," directed auntie, "if you don't key nuffin 'bout de road and go fo de sundown." A brisk gallop brought the riders in sight of the twinkling light of the camp, just as the stars came out. It lay in a little hollow, where a small stream ran through a sparse grove of young white oaks. A half-dozen tents were pitched under the trees, horses and oxen were corralled at a little distance, and a group of men sat on camp stools or lay on blankets about a bright fire. The twang of a banjo became audible as they drew nearer, and they saw a couple of Negroes from some neighboring plantation breaking down a juba in approved style amid the highs of the spectators. Mr. Jeff Thompson, for it was the camp of this redoubtable engineer, gave the travelers a hearty welcome, offered them ground room in his own tent, ordered supper, and set out a small jug, a drop from which he declared necessary on account of the chill of the evening. "I never saw an Eastern man," said Jeff, "who knew how to drink from a jug with one hand. It's as easy as lying, so." He grasped the handle with the right hand, threw the jug back upon his arm, and applied his lips to the nozzle. It was an act as graceful as it was simple. "Besides," said Mr. Thompson, setting it down, "it puts every man on his honor as to quantity." Early to turn in was the rule of the camp, and by 9 o'clock everybody was under his blanket, except Jeff himself, who worked a while at his table over his field book, and then arose, stepped outside the tent door, and sang, in a strong and not unmelodious tenor, the Star-Spangled Banner from beginning to end. It proved to be his nightly practice to let off the unexpended steam of his conversational powers in the words of this stirring song. It was a long time before Philip got to sleep. He saw the firelight, he saw the clear stars through the treetops, he heard the gurgle of the stream, the stamp of the horses, the occasional barking of the dog which followed the cook's wagon, the hooting of an owl, and when these failed he saw Jeff, standing on a battlement, mid the rocket's red glare, and heard him sing, "Oh, say, can you see?" It was the first time he had ever slept on the ground. Chapter 17. We have viewed it, and measured it within all, by the scale. The richest tract of land, love, in the kingdom. There will be made 17 or 80 and millions. Or more, asked may be handled. The devil is an ass. Nobody dressed more like an engineer than Mr. Henry Brierly. The completeness of his appointments was the envy of the corps, and the gay fellow himself was the admiration of the camp servants, axemen, teamsters, and cooks. "I reckon you didn't get them boots, no where's this side, o' St. Louis?" queried the tall Missouri youth who acted as commissary's assistant. "No, New York." "Yas, I've hearn o' New York," continued the butternut lad, attentively studying each item of Harry's dress and endeavoring to cover his design with interesting conversation. "There's Massachusetts. It's not far off. I've hearn Massachusetts was of a place. Let's see what state's Massachusetts in." "Massachusetts," kindly replied Harry, "is in the state of Boston." "Abolition went it, they must 'a' cost right smart," referring to the boots. Harry shouldered his rod and went to the field, tramped over the prairie by day, and figured up results at night, with the utmost cheerfulness and industry, and plotted the line on the profile paper, without, however, the least idea of engineering, practical or theoretical. Perhaps there was not a great deal of scientific knowledge in the entire corps, nor was very much needed. They were making what is called a preliminary survey, and the chief object of a preliminary survey was to get up an excitement about the road, to interest every town in that part of the state in it, under the belief that the road would run through it, and to get the aid of every planter upon the prospect that a station would be on his land. Mr. Jeff Thompson was the most popular engineer who could be found for this work. He did not bother himself much about details or practicabilities of location, but ran merrily along, sighting from the top of one divide to the top of another, and striking plumb every town site and big plantation within 20 or 30 miles of his route. In his own language, he just went booming. This course gave Harry an opportunity, as he said, to learn the practical details of engineering, and it gave Philip a chance to see the country and to judge for himself what prospect of a fortune it offered. Both he and Harry got the refusal of more than one plantation as they went along, and wrote urgent letters to their Eastern correspondents upon the beauty of the land and the certainty that it would quadruple in value as soon as the road was finally located. It seemed strange to them that capitalists did not flock out there and secure this land. They had not been in the field over 2 weeks when Harry wrote to his friend Carl Sellers that he'd better be on the move, for the line was certain to go to Stone's Landing. Anyone who looked at the line on the map, as it was laid down from day to day, would have been uncertain which way it was going. But Jeff had declared that in his judgment, the only practicable route from the point they then stood on was to follow the divide to Stone's Landing, and it was generally understood that that town would be the next one hit. "We'll make it, boys," said the chief, "if we have to go in a balloon." And make it they did. In less than a week, this indomitable engineer had carried his moving caravan over sloughs and branches, across bottoms and along divides, and pitched his tents in the very heart of the city of Stone's Landing. "Well, I'll be dashed," was heard the cheery voice of Mr. Thompson as he stepped outside the tent door at sunrise next morning. "If this don't get me, I say, Yon Grayson, get out your sighting iron and see if you can find Old Sellers Town. Blame me if we wouldn't have run plumb by it if twilight had held on a little longer. Oh, Sterling, Brierly, get up and see the city. There's a steamboat just coming round the bend." And Jeff roared with laughter, "The mayor'll be round here to breakfast." The fellows turned out of the tents, rubbing their eyes, and stared about them. They were camped on the second bench of the narrow bottom of a crooked, sluggish stream that was some 5 rods wide in the present good stage of water. Before them were a dozen log cabins, with stick and mud chimneys, irregularly disposed on either side of a not very well-defined road, which did not seem to know its own mind exactly, and after straggling through the town, wandered off over the rolling prairie in an uncertain way, as if it had started for nowhere and was quite likely to reach its destination. Just as it left the town, however, it was cheered and assisted by a guide-board, upon which was the legend, 10 Mills to Hawkeye. The road had never been made except by the travel over it, and at this season, the rainy June, it was a way of ruts cut in the black soil and of fathomless mud holes. In the principal street of the city, it had received more attention, for hogs, great and small, rooted about in it and wallowed in it, turning the street into a liquid quagmire which could only be crossed on pieces of plank thrown here and there. About the chief cabin, which was the store and grocery of this mart of trade, the mud was more liquid than elsewhere, and the rude platform in front of it and the dry goods boxes mounted thereon were places of refuge for all the loafers of the place. Down by the stream was a dilapidated building which served for a hemp warehouse, and a shaky wharf extended out from it into the water. In fact, a flatboat was there moored by it, its setting poles lying across the gunwales. Above the town, the stream was crossed by a crazy wooden bridge, the supports of which leaned all ways in the soggy soil. The absence of a plank here and there in the flooring made the crossing of the bridge faster than a walk and a fence not necessary to be prohibited by law. "This, gentlemen," said Jeff, "is Columbus River alias Goose Run. If it was widened and deepened and straightened and made long enough, it would be one of the finest rivers in the western country." As the sun rose and sent his level beams along the stream, the thin stratum of mist, or malaria, rose also and dispersed, but the light was not able to enliven the dull water nor give any hint of its apparently fathomless depth. Venerable mud turtles crawled up and roosted upon the old logs in the stream, their backs glistening in the sun, the first inhabitants of the metropolis to begin the active business of the day. It was not long, however, before smoke began to issue from the city chimneys, and before the engineers had finished their breakfast, they were the object of the curious inspection of 6 or 8 boys and men, who lounged into the camp and gazed about them with languid interest, their hands in their pockets, every one. "Good morning, gentlemen," called out the chief engineer from the table. "Good morning," drawled out the spokesman of the party. "I allow this year's the railroad. I hearn it was a common." "Yes, this is the railroad, all but the rails and the iron horse." "I reckon you can get all the rails you want out in my white oak timber over thar," replied the first speaker, who appeared to be a man of property and willing to strike up a trade. "You'll have to negotiate with the contractors about the rails, sir," said Jeff. "Here's Mr. Brierly, I've no doubt would like to buy your rails when the time comes." "Oh," said the man, "I thought maybe you'd fetch the whole billin' along with you, but if you want rails, I've got 'em, hain't I, F?" "Heaps," said F, without taking his eyes off the group at the table. "Well," said Mr. Thompson, rising from his seat and moving towards his tent, "the railroad has come to Stone's Landing, sure. I move we take a drink on it all round." The proposal met with universal favor. Jeff gave prosperity to Stone's Landing and navigation to Goose Run, and the toast was washed down with gusto in the simple fluid of corn, and with the return compliment that a railroad was a good thing, and that Jeff Thompson was no slouch. About 10 o'clock a horse and wagon was descried, making a slow approach to the camp over the prairie. As it drew near, the wagon was seen to contain a portly gentleman who hitched impatiently forward on his seat, shook the reins, and gently touched up his horse, in the vain attempt to communicate his own energy to that dull beast, and looked eagerly at the tents. When the conveyance at length drew up to Mr. Thompson's door, the gentleman descended with great deliberation, straightened himself up, rubbed his hands, and beaming satisfaction from every part of his radiant frame, advanced to the group that was gathered to welcome him, and which had saluted him by name as soon as he came within hearing. "Welcome to Napoleon, gentlemen, welcome. I am proud to see you here, Mr. Thompson. You are looking well, Mr. Sterling. This is the country, sir. Right glad to see you, Mr. Brierly. You got that basket of champagne? No, those blasted river thieves. I'll never send anything more by 'em. The best brand, Roederer. The last I had in my cellar, from a lot sent me by Sir George Gore, took him out on a buffalo hunt when he visited our country, is always sending me some trifle. You haven't looked about any yet, gentlemen. It's in the rough yet, in the rough. Those buildings will all have to come down. That's the place for the public square, courthouse, hotels, churches, jail, all that sort of thing. About where we stand, the depot. How does that strike your engineering eye, Mr. Thompson? Down yonder the business streets, running to the wharves. The university up there, on rising ground, sightly place, see the river for miles. That's Columbus River, only 49 miles to the Missouri. You see what it is, placid, steady, no current to interfere with navigation, wants widening in places and dredging, dredge out the harbor and raise a levee in front of the town, made by nature on purpose for a mart. Look at all this country, not another building within 10 miles, no other navigable stream, lay of the land points right here. Hemp, tobacco, corn must come here. The railroad will do it. Napoleon won't know itself in a year. Don't now evidently, said Philip aside to Harry. Have you breakfasted, Colonel? Hastily cup of coffee. Can't trust any coffee, I don't import myself. But I put up a basket of provisions. Wife would put in a few delicacies, women always will, and a half-dozen of that Burgundy. I was telling you of Mr. Briefly. By the way, you never got to dine with me. And the Colonel strode away to the wagon and looked under the seat for the basket. Apparently it was not there, for the Colonel raised up the flap, looked in front and behind, and then exclaimed, "Confound it, that comes of not doing a thing yourself. I trusted to the women folks to set that basket in the wagon, and it ain't there." The camp cook speedily prepared a savory breakfast for the Colonel, broiled chicken, eggs, cornbread, and coffee, to which he did ample justice, and topped off with a drop of old Bourbon from Mr. Thompson's private store, a brand which he said he knew well. He should think it came from his own sideboard. While the engineer corps went to the field to run back a couple of miles and ascertain, approximately, if a road could ever get down to the landing, and to sight ahead across the run, and see if it could ever get out again, Carl Sellers and Harry sat down and began to roughly map out the city of Napoleon on a large piece of drawing paper. "I've got the refusal of a mile square here," said the Colonel, "in our names for a year, with a quarter interest reserved for the 4 owners." They laid out the town liberally, not lacking room, leaving space for the railroad to come in, and for the river as it was to be when improved. The engineers reported that the railroad could come in by taking a little sweep and crossing the stream on a high bridge, but the grades would be steep. Carl Sellers said he didn't care so much about the grades if the road could only be made to reach the elevators on the river. The next day Mr. Thompson made a hasty survey of the stream for a mile or two, so that the Colonel and Harry were enabled to show on their map how nobly that would accommodate the city. Jeff took a little writing from the Colonel and Harry for a prospective share, but Philip declined to join in, saying that he had no money and didn't want to make engagements he couldn't fulfill. The next morning the camp moved on, followed till it was out of sight by the listless eyes of the group in front of the store, one of whom remarked that he'd be doggoned if he ever expected to see that railroad any mo. Harry went with the Colonel to Hawkeye to complete their arrangements, a part of which was the preparation of a petition to Congress for the improvement of the navigation of Columbus River. Chapter 18. 8 years have passed since the death of Mr. Hawkins. 8 years are not many in the life of a nation or the history of a state, but they may be years of destiny that shall fix the current of the century following. Such years were those that followed the little scrimmage on Lexington Common. Such years were those that followed the double-shotted demand for the surrender of Fort Sumter. History is never done with inquiring of these years and summoning witnesses about them and trying to understand their significance. The 8 years in America, fro to 1868, uprooted institutions that were centuries old, changed the politics of a people, transformed the social life of half the country, and wrought so profoundly upon the entire national character that the influence cannot be measured short of 2 or 3 generations. As we are accustomed to interpret the economy of providence, the life of the individual is as nothing to that of the nation or the race. But who can say, in the broader view and the more intelligent weight of values, that the life of one man is not more than that of a nationality, and that there is not a tribunal where the tragedy of one human soul shall not seem more significant than the overturning of any human institution whatever? When one thinks of the tremendous forces of the upper and the nether world, which play for the mastery of the soul of a woman during the few years in which she passes from plastic girlhood to the ripe maturity of womanhood, he may well stand in awe before the momentous drama. What capacities she has of purity, tenderness, goodness, what capacities of vileness, bitterness, and evil. Nature must needs be lavish with the mother and creator of men, and center in her all the possibilities of life. And a few critical years can decide whether her life is to be full of sweetness and light, whether she is to be the vestal of a holy temple, or whether she will be the fallen priestess of a desecrated shrine. There are women, it is true, who seem to be capable neither of rising much nor of falling much, and whom a conventional life saves from any special development of character. But Laura was not one of them. She had the fatal gift of beauty, and that more fatal gift which does not always accompany mere beauty, the power of fascination, a power that may indeed exist without beauty. She had will and pride and courage and ambition, and she was left to be very much her own guide at the age when romance comes to the aid of passion, and when the awakening powers of her vigorous mind had little object on which to discipline themselves. The tremendous conflict that was fought in this girl's soul none of those about her knew, and very few knew that her life had in it anything unusual or romantic or strange. Those were troublous days in Hawkeye as well as in most other Missouri towns, days of confusion, when between Unionist and Confederate occupations, sudden maraudings and bushwhackings and raids, individuals escaped observation or comment in actions that would have filled the town with scandal in quiet times. Fortunately, we only need to deal with Laura's life at this period historically, and look back upon such portions of it as will serve to reveal the woman as she was at the time of the arrival of Mr. Harry Brierly in Hawkeye. The Hawkins family were settled there, and had a hard enough struggle with poverty and the necessity of keeping up appearances in accord with their own family pride, and the large expectations they secretly cherished of a fortune in the knobs of East Tennessee. How pinched they were perhaps no one knew but Clay, to whom they looked for almost their whole support. Washington had been in Hawkeye off and on, attracted away occasionally by some tremendous speculation, from which he invariably returned to Jen Boswell's office, as poor as he went. He was the inventor of no one knew how many useless contrivances, which were not worth patenting, and his years had been passed in dreaming and planning to no purpose, until he was now a man of about 30, without a profession or a permanent occupation, tall, brown-haired, dreamy person of the best intentions and the frailest resolution. Probably, however, the 8 years had been happier to him than to any others in his circle, for the time had been mostly spent in a blissful dream of the coming of enormous wealth. He went out with a company from Hawkeye to the war, and was not wanting in courage, but he would have been a better soldier if he had been less engaged in contrivances for circumventing the enemy by strategy unknown to the books. It happened to him to be captured in one of his self-appointed expeditions, but the federal colonel released him after a short examination, satisfied that he could most injure the Confederate forces opposed to the Unionists by returning him to his regiment. Sellers was of course a prominent man during the war. He was captain of the Home Guards in Hawkeye, and he never left home except upon one occasion, when on the strength of a rumor, he executed a flank movement and fortified Stone's Landing, a place which no one unacquainted with the country would be likely to find. "Gad," said the colonel afterwards, "the landing is the key to Upper Missouri, and it is the only place the enemy never captured. If other places had been defended as well as that was, the result would have been different, sir." The colonel had his own theories about war as he had in other things. If everybody had stayed at home as he did, he said, the South never would have been conquered. For what would there have been to conquer? Mr. Jeff Davis was constantly writing him to take command of a corps in the Confederate Army, but Carl Sellers said, no, his duty was at home. And he was by no means idle. He was the inventor of the famous air torpedo, which came very near destroying the Union armies in Missouri and the city of St. Louis itself. His plan was to fill a torpedo with Greek fire and poisonous and deadly missiles, attach it to a balloon, and then let it sail away over the hostile camp and explode at the right moment when the time fuse burned out. He intended to use this invention in the capture of St. Louis, exploding his torpedoes over the city and raining destruction upon it until the army of occupation would gladly capitulate. He was unable to procure the Greek fire, but he constructed a vicious torpedo which would have answered the purpose, but the first one prematurely exploded in his wood house, blowing it clean away and setting fire to his house. The neighbors helped him put out the conflagration, but they discouraged any more experiments of that sort. The patriotic old gentleman, however, planted so much powder and so many explosive contrivances in the roads leading into Hawkeye, and then forgot the exact spots of danger, that people were afraid to travel the highways and used to come to town across the fields. The colonel's motto was, millions for defense, but not 1 cent for tribute. When Laura came to Hawkeye, she might have forgotten the annoyances of the gossips of Murfreesburg and have outlived the bitterness that was growing in her heart, if she had been thrown less upon herself, or if the surroundings of her life had been more congenial and helpful. But she had little society, less and less as she grew older, that was congenial to her, and her mind preyed upon itself, and the mystery of her birth at once chagrined her and raised in her the most extravagant expectations. She was proud, and she felt the sting of poverty. She could not but be conscious of her beauty also, and she was vain of that, and came to take a sort of delight in the exercise of her fascinations upon the rather loutish young men who came in her way and whom she despised. There was another world open to her, a world of books, but it was not the best world of that sort, for the small libraries she had access to in Hawkeye were decidedly miscellaneous, and largely made up of romances and fictions which fed her imagination with the most exaggerated notions of life, and showed her men and women in a very false sort of heroism. From these stories, she learned what a woman of keen intellect and some culture joined to beauty and fascination of manner might expect to accomplish in society as she read of it. And along with these ideas, she imbibed other very crude ones in regard to the emancipation of woman. There were also other books, histories, biographies of distinguished people, travels in far lands, poems, especially those of Byron, Scott, and Shelley and Moore, which she eagerly absorbed and appropriated therefrom what was to her liking. Nobody in Hawkeye had read so much or after a fashion studied so diligently as Laura. She passed for an accomplished girl and no doubt thought herself one, as she was, judged by any standard near her. During the war there came to Hawkeye a Confederate officer, Carl Selby, who was stationed there for a time, in command of that district. He was a handsome, soldierly man of 30 years, a graduate of the University of Virginia, and of distinguished family, if his story might be believed, and it was evident, a man of the world and of extensive travel and adventure. To find in such an out-of-the-way country place a woman like Laura was a piece of good luck upon which Carl Selby congratulated himself. He was studiously polite to her and treated her with a consideration to which she was unaccustomed. She had read of such men, but she had never seen one before, one so high-bred, so noble in sentiment, so entertaining in conversation, so engaging in manner. It is a long story, Unfortunately, it is an old story, and it need not be dwelt on. Laura loved him, and believes that his love for her was as pure and deep as her own. She worshipped him, and would have counted her life a little thing to give him, if he would only love her and let her feed the hunger of her heart upon him. The passion possessed her whole being, and lifted her up, till she seemed to walk on air. It was all true, then, the romances she had read, the bliss of love she had dreamed of. Why had she never noticed before how blithesome the world was, how jocund with love? The birds sang it, the trees whispered it to her as she passed, the very flowers beneath her feet strewed the way as for a bridal march. When the colonel went away, they were engaged to be married, as soon as he could make certain arrangements which he represented to be necessary, and quit the army. He wrote to her from Harding, a small town in the southwest corner of the state, saying that he should be held in the service longer than he had expected, but that it would not be more than a few months. Then he should be at liberty to take her to Chicago, where he had property, and should have business, either now or as soon as the war was over, which he thought could not last long. Meantime, why should they be separated? He was established in comfortable quarters, and if she could find company and join him, they would be married and gain so many more months of happiness. Was woman ever prudent when she loved? Laura went to Harding, the neighbors supposed to nurse Washington, who had fallen ill there. Her engagement was, of course, known in Hawkeye, and was indeed a matter of pride to her family. Mrs. Hawkins would have told the first inquirer that Laura had gone to be married, but Laura had cautioned her. She did not want to be thought of, she said, as going in search of a husband. Let the news come back after she was married. So she traveled to Harding on the pretense we have mentioned, and was married. She was married, but something must have happened on that very day or the next that alarmed her. Washington did not know then or after what it was, but Laura bound him not to send news of her marriage to Hawkeye yet, and to enjoin her mother not to speak of it. Whatever cruel suspicion or nameless dread this was, Laura tried bravely to put it away, and not let it cloud her happiness. Communication that summer, as may be imagined, was neither regular nor frequent between the remote Confederate camp at Harding and Hawkeye, and Laura was in a measure lost sight of. Indeed, everyone had troubles enough of his own without borrowing from his neighbors. Laura had given herself utterly to her husband, and if he had faults, if he was selfish, if he was sometimes coarse, if he was dissipated, she did not or would not see it. It was the passion of her life, the time when her whole nature went to flood tide and swept away all barriers. Was her husband ever cold or indifferent? She shut her eyes to everything but her sense of possession of her idol. 3 months passed. One morning her husband informed her that he had been ordered south and must go within 2 hours. "I can be ready," said Laura cheerfully. "But I can't take you. You must go back to Hawkeye." "Can't take me?" Laura asked, with wonder in her eyes. "I can't live without you, you said." "Oh, bother what I said." And the colonel took up his sword to buckle it on, and then continued coolly, "The fact is, Laura, our romance is played out." Laura heard, but she did not comprehend. She caught his arm and cried, "George, how can you joke so cruelly? I will go anywhere with you. I will wait anywhere. I can't go back to Hawkeye." "Well, go where you like. Perhaps," continued he with a sneer, "you would do as well to wait here for another colonel." Laura's brain whirled. She did not yet comprehend. "What does this mean? Where are you going?" "It means," said the officer in measured words, "that you haven't anything to show for a legal marriage, and that I am going to New Orleans." "It's a lie, George, it's a lie. I am your wife. I shall go. I shall follow you to New Orleans." "Perhaps my wife might not like it." Laura raised her head. Her eyes flamed with fire. She tried to utter a cry and fell senseless on the floor. When she came to herself, the colonel was gone. Washington Hawkins stood at her bedside. Did she come to herself? Was there anything left in her heart but hate and bitterness, a sense of an infamous wrong at the hands of the only man she had ever loved? She returned to Hawkeye. With the exception of Washington and his mother, no one knew what had happened. The neighbors supposed that the engagement with Carl Selby had fallen through. Laura was ill for a long time, but she recovered, She had that resolution in her that could conquer death almost. And with her health came back her beauty and an added fascination, a something that might be mistaken for sadness. Is there a beauty in the knowledge of evil, a beauty that shines out in the face of a person whose inward life is transformed by some terrible experience? Is the pathos in the eyes of the Beatrice sensei from her guilt or her innocence? Laura was not much changed. The lovely woman had a devil in her heart, that was all. Chapter 19. Mr. Harry Brierly drew his pay as an engineer while he was living at the City Hotel in Hawkeye. Mr. Thompson had been kind enough to say that it didn't make any difference whether he was with the Corps or not. And although Harry protested to the Colonel daily and to Washington Hawkins that he must go back at once to the line and superintend the layout with reference to his contract, yet he did not go, but wrote instead long letters to Philip, instructing him to keep his eye out and to let him know when any difficulty occurred that required his presence. Meantime, Harry blossomed out in the society of Hawkeye, as he did in any society where fortune cast him and he had the slightest opportunity to expand. Indeed, the talents of a rich and accomplished young fellow like Harry were not likely to go unappreciated in such a place. A land operator, engaged in vast speculations, a favorite in the select circles of New York, in correspondence with brokers and bankers, intimate with public men at Washington, one who could play the guitar and touch the banjo lightly, and who had an eye for a pretty girl and knew the language of flattery, was welcome everywhere in Hawkeye. Even Miss Laura Hawkins thought it worthwhile to use her fascinations upon him and to endeavor to entangle the volatile fellow in the meshes of her attractions. "Gad," says Harry to the Colonel, "she's a superb creature. She'd make a stir in New York, money or no money. There are men I know would give her a railroad or an opera house or whatever she wanted, at least they'd promise." Harry had a way of looking at women as he looked at anything else in the world he wanted, and he half resolved to appropriate Miss Laura during his stay in Hawkeye. Perhaps the Colonel divined his thoughts or was offended at Harry's talk, for he replied, "No nonsense, Mr. Brierly. Nonsense won't do in Hawkeye, not with my friends. The Hawkins blood is good blood, all the way from Tennessee. The Hawkinses are under the weather now, but their Tennessee property is millions when it comes into market." "Of course, Colonel, not the least offense intended, but you can see she is a fascinating woman. I was only thinking, as to this appropriation, now, what such a woman could do in Washington. All correct, too, all correct. Common thing, I assure you, in Washington. The wives of senators, representatives, cabinet officers, all sorts of wives, and some who are not wives, use their influence. You want an appointment? Do you go to Senator 10? Not much. You get on the right side of his wife. Is it an appropriation? You'd go straight to the committee or to the Interior Office, I suppose. You'd learn better than that. It takes a woman to get anything through the Land Office. I tell you, Miss Laura would fascinate an appropriation right through the Senate and the House of Representatives in one session, if she was in Washington, as your friend, Colonel, of course, as your friend." "Would you have her sign our petition?" asked the Colonel innocently. Harry laughed. "Women don't get anything by petitioning Congress. Nobody does, that's for form. Petitions are referred somewhere, and that's the last of them. You can't refer a handsome woman so easily when she is present. They prefer 'em mostly." The petition, however, was elaborately drawn up, with a glowing description of Napoleon and the adjacent country, and a statement of the absolute necessity to the prosperity of that region and of one of the stations on the great through route to the Pacific, of the immediate improvement of Columbus River. To this was appended a map of the city and a survey of the river. It was signed by all the people at Stone's Landing who could write their names, by Carl Beriah Sellers, and the Colonel agreed to have the names headed by all the senators and representatives from the state, and by a sprinkling of ex-governors and ex-members of Congress. When completed, it was a formidable document. Its preparation, and that of more minute plots of the new city, consumed the valuable time of Sellers and Harry for many weeks, and served to keep them both in the highest spirits. In the eyes of Washington Hawkins, Harry was a superior being, a man who was able to bring things to pass in a way that excited his enthusiasm. He never tired of listening to his stories of what he had done and of what he was going to do. As for Washington, Harry thought he was a man of ability and comprehension, but too visionary, he told the Colonel. The colonel said he might be right, but he had never noticed anything visionary about him. He's got his plans, sir. God bless my soul, at his age, I was full of plans. But experience sobers a man. I never touch anything now that hasn't been weighed in my judgment. And when Beriah Sellers puts his judgment on a thing, there it is. Whatever might have been Harry's intentions with regard to Laura, he saw more and more of her every day, until he got to be restless and nervous when he was not with her. That consummate artist in passion allowed him to believe that the fascination was mainly on his side, and so worked upon his vanity while inflaming his ardor that he scarcely knew what he was about. Her coolness and coyness were even made to appear the simple precautions of a modest timidity, and attracted him even more than the little tendernesses into which she was occasionally surprised. He could never be away from her long day or evening, and in a short time their intimacy was the town talk. She played with him so adroitly that Harry thought she was absorbed in love for him, and yet he was amazed that he did not get on faster in his conquest. And when he thought of it, he was piqued as well. A country girl poor enough, that was evident, living with her family in a cheap and most unattractive frame house, such as carpenters build in America, scantily furnished and unadorned, without the adventitious aids of dress or jewels or the fine manners of society. Harry couldn't understand it. But she fascinated him and held him just beyond the line of absolute familiarity at the same time. While he was with her, she made him forget that the Hawkins house was nothing but a wooden tenement, with 4 small square rooms on the ground floor and a half-story. It might have been a palace for aught he knew. Perhaps Laura was older than Harry. She was, at any rate, at that ripe age when beauty in woman seems more solid than in the budding period of girlhood, and she had come to understand her powers perfectly, and to know exactly how much of the susceptibility and archness of the girl it was profitable to retain. She saw that many women, with the best intentions, make a mistake of carrying too much girlishness into womanhood. Such a woman would have attracted Harry at any time, but only a woman with a cool brain and exquisite art could have made him lose his head in this way, for Harry thought himself a man of the world. The young fellow never dreamed that he was merely being experimented on. He was to her a man of another society and another culture, different from that she had any knowledge of except in books, and she was not unwilling to try on him the fascinations of her mind and person. For Laura had her dreams. She detested the narrow limits in which her lot was cast. She hated poverty. Much of her reading had been of modern works of fiction, written by her own sex, which had revealed to her something of her own powers and given her, indeed, an exaggerated notion of the influence, the wealth, the position a woman may attain who has beauty and talent and ambition and a little culture, and is not too scrupulous in the use of them. She wanted to be rich, she wanted luxury, she wanted men at her feet, her slaves, and she had not, thanks to some of the novels she had read, the nicest discrimination between notoriety and reputation. Perhaps she did not know how fatal notoriety usually is to the bloom of womanhood. With the other Hawkins children, Laura had been brought up in the belief that they had inherited a fortune in the Tennessee lands. She did not by any means share all the delusion of the family, but her brain was not seldom busy with schemes about it. Washington seemed to her only to dream of it, and to be willing to wait for its riches to fall upon him in a golden shower. But she was impatient, and wished she were a man to take hold of the business. You men must enjoy your schemes and your activity and liberty to go about the world, she said to Harry one day when he had been talking of New York and Washington and his incessant engagements. Oh yes, replied that martyr to business, it's all well enough if you don't have too much of it, but it only has one object. What is that? If a woman doesn't know, it's useless to tell her. What do you suppose I am staying in Hawkeye for, week after week, when I ought to be with my corps? I suppose it's your business with Carl Sellers about Napoleon. You've always told me so, answered Laura, with a look intended to contradict her words. And now I tell you that is all arranged. I suppose you'll tell me I ought to go. Harry, exclaimed Laura, touching his arm and letting her pretty hand rest there a moment. Why should I want you to go away, the only person in Hawkeye who understands me? But you refuse to understand me, replied Harry, flattered but still petulant. "You are like an iceberg when we are alone." Laura looked up with wonder in her great eyes, and something like a blush suffusing her face, followed by a look of languor that penetrated Harry's heart as if it had been longing. "Did I ever show any want of confidence in you, Harry?" And she gave him her hand, which Harry pressed with effusion. Something in her manner told him that he must be content with that favor. It was always so. She excited his hopes and denied him, inflamed his passion and restrained it, and wounded him in her toils day by day. To what purpose? It was keen delight to Laura to prove that she had power over men. Laura liked to hear about life at the East, and especially about the luxurious society in which Mr. Brierly moved when he was at home. It pleased her imagination to fancy herself a queen in it. "You should be a winter in Washington," Harry said. "But I have no acquaintances there. Don't know any of the families of the congressmen. They like to have a pretty woman staying with them." "Not one. Suppose Carl Sellers should have business there, say, about this Columbus River appropriation." Sellers and Laura laughed. "You needn't laugh, queerer things have happened. Sellers knows everybody from Missouri, and from the West too, for that matter. He'd introduce you to Washington life quick enough. It doesn't need a crowbar to break your way into society there, as it does in Philadelphia. It's democratic, Washington is. Money or beauty will open any door. If I were a handsome woman, I shouldn't want any better place than the capital to pick up a prince or a fortune." "Thank you," replied Laura, "but I prefer the quiet of home and the love of those I know." And her face wore a look of sweet contentment and unworldliness that finished Mr. Harry Brierly for the day. Nevertheless, the hint that Harry had dropped fell upon good ground and bore fruit an hundredfold. It worked in her mind until she had built up a plan on it, and almost a career for herself. "Why not?" she said. "Why shouldn't I do as other women have done?" She took the first opportunity to see Carl Sellers and to sound him about the Washington visit. How was he getting on with his navigation scheme? Would it be likely to take him from home to Jefferson City, or to Washington, perhaps? "Well, maybe. If the people of Napoleon want me to go to Washington and look after that matter, I might tear myself from my home. It's been suggested to me, but not a word of it to Mrs. Sellers and the children. Maybe they wouldn't like to think of their father in Washington. But Dilworthy, Senator Dilworthy, says to me, 'Colonel, you are the man. You could influence more votes than anyone else on such a measure. An old settler, a man of the people, you know the wants of Missouri. You've a respect for religion too,' says he, 'and know how the cause of the gospel goes with improvements.' Which is true enough, Miss Laura, and hasn't been enough thought of in connection with Napoleon. He's an able man, Dilworthy, and a good man. A man has got to be good to succeed as he has. He's only been in Congress a few years, and he must be worth $1 million. First thing in the morning when he stayed with me, he asked about family prayers, whether we had 'em before or after breakfast. I hated to disappoint the senator, but I had to out with it, tell him we didn't have 'em, not steady. He said he understood, business interruptions and all that, some men were well enough without, but as for him, he never neglected the ordinances of religion. He doubted if the Columbus River appropriation would succeed if we did not invoke the divine blessing on it." Perhaps it is unnecessary to say to the reader that Senator Dilworthy had not stayed with Carl Sellers while he was in Hawkeye, this visit to his house being only one of the colonel's hallucinations, one of those instant creations of his fertile fancy, which were always flashing into his brain and out of his mouth in the course of any conversation, and without interrupting the flow of it. During the summer, Philip rode across the country and made a short visit in Hawkeye, giving Harry an opportunity to show him the progress that he and the colonel had made in their operation at Stone's Landing, to introduce him also to Laura, and to borrow a little money when he departed. Harry bragged about his conquest, as was his habit, and took Philip round to see his western prize. Laura received Mr. Philip with a courtesy and a slight hauteur that rather surprised and not a little interested him. He saw at once that she was older than Harry, and soon made up his mind that she was leading his friend a country dance to which he was unaccustomed. At least he thought he saw that, and half hinted as much to Harry, who flared up at once. But on a second visit Philip was not so sure. The young lady was certainly kind and friendly and almost confiding with Harry, and treated Philip with the greatest consideration. She deferred to his opinions and listened attentively when he talked, and in time met his frank manner with an equal frankness, so that he was quite convinced that whatever she might feel towards Harry, she was sincere with him. Perhaps his manly way did win her liking. Perhaps in her mind she compared him with Harry and recognized in him a man to whom a woman might give her whole soul, recklessly and with little care if she lost it. Philip was not invincible to her beauty nor to the intellectual charm of her presence. The weeks seemed very short that he passed in Hawkeye, and when he bade Laura good-bye, he seemed to have known her a year. "We shall see you again, Mr. Sterling," she said as she gave him her hand, with just a shade of sadness in her handsome eyes. And when he turned away, she followed him with a look that might have disturbed his serenity, if he had not at the moment had a little square letter in his breast pocket, dated at Philadelphia and signed Ruth. Chapter 20. The visit of Senator Abner Dilworthy was an event in Hawkeye. When a senator, whose place is in Washington moving among the great and guiding the destinies of the nation, condescends to mingle among the people and accept the hospitalities of such a place as Hawkeye, the honor is not considered a light one. All parties are flattered by it, and politics are forgotten in the presence of one so distinguished among his fellows. Senator Dilworthy, who was from a neighboring state, had been a Unionist in the darkest days of his country and had thriven by it, but was that any reason why Carl Sellers, who had been a Confederate and had not thriven by it, should give him the cold shoulder? The senator was the guest of his old friend Jen Boswell, but it almost appeared that he was indebted to Carl Sellers for the unreserved hospitalities of the town. It was the large-hearted colonel who, in a manner, gave him the freedom of the city. "You are known here, sir," said the colonel, "and Hawkeye is proud of you. You will find every door open and a welcome at every hearthstone. I should insist upon your going to my house if you were not claimed by your older friend Jen Boswell, but you will mingle with our people and you will see here developments that will surprise you." The colonel was so profuse in his hospitality that he must have made the impression upon himself that he had entertained the senator at his own mansion during his stay. At any rate, he afterwards always spoke of him as his guest, and not seldom referred to the senator's relish of certain viands on his table. He did, in fact, press him to dine upon the morning of the day the senator was going away. Senator Dilworthy was large and portly, though not tall, a pleasant-spoken man, a popular man with the people. He took a lively interest in the town and all the surrounding country, and made many inquiries as to the progress of agriculture, of education, and of religion, and especially as to the condition of the emancipated race. "Providence," he said, "has placed them in our hands, and although you and I, General, might have chosen a different destiny for them under the Constitution, yet Providence knows best." "You can't do much with them," interrupted Carl Sellers. "They are a speculating race, sir, disinclined to work for white folks without security, planning how to live by only working for themselves. Idle, sir, there's my garden just a ruin of weeds, nothing practical in 'em." "There is some truth in your observation, Colonel, but you must educate them. You educate the Negro, and you make him more speculating than he was before. If he won't stick to any industry except for himself now, what will he do then?" "But, Colonel, the Negro, when educated, will be more able to make his speculations fruitful." "Never, sir, never. He would only have a wider scope to injure himself. A Negro has no grasp, sir. Now, a white man can conceive great operations and carry them out. A Negro can't." "Still," replied the senator, "granting that he might injure himself in a worldly point of view, his elevation through education would multiply his chances for the hereafter, which is the important thing after all, Colonel. And no matter what the result is, we must fulfill our duty by this being." "I'd elevate his soul," promptly responded the colonel. "That's just it. You can't make his soul too immortal, but I wouldn't touch him himself. Yes, sir, make his soul immortal, but don't disturb the Negro as he is." Of course, one of the entertainments offered the senator was a public reception held in the courthouse, at which he made a speech to his fellow citizens. Carl Sellers was master of ceremonies. He escorted the band from the City Hotel to Gen. Boswell's. He marshaled the procession of Masons, of Odd Fellows, and of firemen, the Good Templars, the Sons of Temperance, the Cadets of Temperance, the Daughters of Rebecca, the Sunday school children, and citizens generally, which followed the senator to the courthouse. He bustled about the room long after everyone else was seated, and loudly cried order. In the dead silence which preceded the introduction of the senator by Gen Boswell, the occasion was one to call out his finest powers of personal appearance, and one he long dwelt on with pleasure. This not being an edition of the Congressional Globe, it is impossible to give Senator Dilworthy's speech in full. He began somewhat as follows. Fellow citizens, it gives me great pleasure to thus meet and mingle with you, to lay aside for a moment the heavy duties of an official and burdensome station, and confer in familiar converse with my friends in your great state. The good opinion of my fellow citizens of all sections is the sweetest solace in all my anxieties. I look forward with longing to the time when I can lay aside the cares of office. Damn sight, shouted a tipsy fellow near the door. Cries of put him out. My friends, do not remove him. Let the misguided man stay. I see that he is a victim of that evil which is swallowing up public virtue and sapping the foundation of society. As I was saying, when I can lay down the cares of office and retire to the sweets of private life in some such sweet, peaceful, intelligent, wide-awake, and patriotic place as Hawkeye applause. I have traveled much. I have seen all parts of our glorious Union, but I have never seen a lovelier village than yours, or one that has more signs of commercial and industrial and religious prosperity. More applause. The senator then launched into a sketch of our great country, and dwelt for an hour or more upon its prosperity and the dangers which threatened it. He then touched reverently upon the institutions of religion, and upon the necessity of private purity if we were to have any public morality. I trust, he said, that there are children within the sound of my voice, and after some remarks to them, the senator closed with an apostrophe to the genius of American liberty, walking with the Sunday school in one hand and temperance in the other up the glorified steps of the national Capitol. Carl Sellers did not, of course, lose the opportunity to impress upon so influential a person as the senator the desirability of improving the navigation of Columbus River. He and Mr. Brierly took the senator over to Napoleon and opened to him their plan. It was a plan that the senator could understand without a great deal of explanation, for he seemed to be familiar with the like improvements elsewhere. When, however, they reached Stone's Landing, the senator looked about him and inquired, "Is this Napoleon?" "This is the nucleus, said the colonel, unrolling his map. "Here is the depot, the church, the city hall, and so on." "I see. How far from here is Columbus River? Does that stream empty?" That's Goose Run. Thar ain't no Columbus, thout'n it's over to Hawkeye," interrupted one of the citizens who had come out to stare at the strangers. "A railroad come here last summer, but it hain't been here no mo." "Yes, sir," the colonel hastened to explain. "In the old records, Columbus River is called Goose Run. You see how it sweeps round the town, 49 miles to the Missouri. Sloop navigation all the way pretty much drains this whole country. When it's improved, steamboats will run right up here. It's got to be enlarged, deepened. You see by the map, Columbus River, this country must have water communication. You'll want a considerable appropriation, Carl Sellers." "I should say $1 million. Is that your figure, Mr. Brierly?" "According to our surveys," said Harry, $1 million would do it. $1 million spent on the river would make Napoleon worth $2 million at least." "I see," nodded the senator. "But you'd better begin by asking only for 200,000 or 300,000, the usual way. You can begin to sell town lots on that appropriation, you know." The senator himself, to do him justice, was not very much interested in the country or the stream, but he favored the appropriation, and he gave the colonel and Mr. Brierly to understand that he would endeavor to get it through. Harry, who thought he was shrewd and understood Washington, suggested an interest. But he saw that the senator was wounded by the suggestion. "You will offend me by repeating such an observation," he said. "Whatever I do will be for the public interest. It will require a portion of the appropriation for necessary expenses, and I am sorry to say that there are members who will have to be seen, but you can reckon upon my humble services." This aspect of the subject was not again alluded to. The senator possessed himself of the facts, not from his observation of the ground, but from the lips of Carl Sellers, and laid the appropriation scheme away among his other plans for benefiting the public. It was on this visit also that the senator made the acquaintance of Mr. Washington Hawkins, and was greatly taken with his innocence, his guileless manner, and perhaps with his ready adaptability to enter upon any plan proposed. Carl Sellers was pleased to see this interest that Washington had awakened, especially since it was likely to further his expectations with regard to the Tennessee lands, the senator having remarked to the colonel that he delighted to help any deserving young man when the promotion of a private advantage could at the same time be made to contribute to the general good, and he did not doubt that this was an opportunity of that kind. The result of several conferences with Washington was that the senator proposed that he should go to Washington with him and become his private secretary and the secretary of his committee, a proposal which was eagerly accepted. The senator spent Sunday in Hawkeye and attended church. He cheered the heart of the worthy and zealous minister by an expression of his sympathy in his labors and by many inquiries in regard to the religious state of the region. It was not a very promising state, and the good man felt how much lighter his task would be if he had the aid of such a man as Senator Dilworthy. "I am glad to see, my dear sir," said the senator, "that you give them the doctrines. It is owing to a neglect of the doctrines that there is such a fearful falling away in the country. I wish that we might have you in Washington as chaplain now in the Senate." The good man could not but be a little flattered, and if sometimes, thereafter, in his discouraging work, he allowed the thought that he might perhaps be called to Washington as chaplain of the Senate, to cheer him, who can wonder? The senator's commendation at least did one service for him. It elevated him in the opinion of Hawkeye. Laura was at church alone that day, and Mr. Brierly walked home with her. A part of their way lay with that of General Boswell and Senator Dilworthy, and introductions were made. Laura had her own reasons for wishing to know the senator, and the senator was not a man who could be called indifferent to charms such as hers. That meek young lady so commended herself to him in the short walk, that he announced his intentions of paying his respects to her the next day, an intention which Harry received glumly, and when the senator was out of hearing, he called him an old fool. "Fie," said Laura, "I do believe you are jealous, Harry. He is a very pleasant man. He said you were a young man of great promise." The senator did call next day, and the result of his visit was that he was confirmed in his impression that there was something about him very attractive to ladies. He saw Laura again and again during his stay, and felt more and more the subtle influence of her feminine beauty, which every man felt who came near her. Harry was beside himself with rage while the senator remained in town. He declared that women were always ready to drop any man for higher game, and he attributed his own ill luck to the senator's appearance. The fellow was in fact crazy about her beauty and ready to beat his brains out in chagrin. Perhaps Laura enjoyed his torment, but she soothed him with blandishments that increased his ardor, and she smiled to herself to think that he had, with all his protestations of love, never spoken of marriage. Probably the vivacious fellow never had thought of it. At any rate, when he at length went away from Hawkeye, he was no nearer it, but there was no telling to what desperate lengths his passion might not carry him. Laura bade him good-bye with tender regret, which, however, did not disturb her peace or interfere with her plans. The visit of Senator Dilworthy had become of more importance to her, and it by and by bore the fruit she longed for in an invitation to visit his family in the national capital during the winter session of Congress. Chapter 21. Oh, lift your natures up. Embrace our aims, work out your freedom, girls. Knowledge is now no more a fountain sealed. Drink deep until the habits of the slave, the sins of emptiness, gossip, and spite, and slander die. The princess Whether medicine is a science or only an empirical method of getting a living out of the ignorance of the human race, Ruth found before her first term was over at the medical school that there were other things she needed to know quite as much as that which is taught in medical books, and that she could never satisfy her aspirations without more general culture. Does your doctor know anything? I don't mean about medicine, but about things in general. Is he a man of information and good sense? Once asked an old practitioner. If he doesn't know anything but medicine, the chance is he doesn't know that. The close application to her special study was beginning to tell upon Ruth's delicate health also, and the summer brought with it only weariness and indisposition for any mental effort. In this condition of mind and body, the quiet of her home and the unexciting companionship of those about her were more than ever tiresome. She followed with more interest Philip's sparkling account of his life in the West, and longed for his experiences, and to know some of those people of a world so different from here, who alternately amused and displeased him. He at least was learning the world, the good and the bad of it, as must happen to everyone who accomplishes anything in it. But what Ruth wrote could a woman do, tied up by custom and cast into particular circumstances out of which it was almost impossible to extricate herself? Philip thought that he would go some day and extricate Ruth, but he did not write that, for he had the instinct to know that this was not the extrication she dreamed of, and that she must find out by her own experience what her heart really wanted. Philip was not a philosopher, to be sure, but he had the old-fashioned notion that whatever a woman's theories of life might be, she would come round to matrimony, only give her time. He could indeed recall to mind one woman, and he never knew a nobler, whose whole soul was devoted, and who believed that her life was consecrated to a certain benevolent project in singleness of life, who yielded to the touch of matrimony as an icicle yields to a sunbeam. Neither at home nor elsewhere did Ruth utter any complaint, or admit any weariness or doubt of her ability to pursue the path she had marked out for herself. But her mother saw clearly enough her struggle with infirmity, and was not deceived by either her gaiety or by the cheerful composure which she carried into all the ordinary duties that fell to her. She saw plainly enough that Ruth needed an entire change of scene and of occupation, and perhaps she believed that such a change, with the knowledge of the world it would bring, would divert Ruth from a course for which she felt she was physically entirely unfitted. It therefore suited the wishes of all concerned, when autumn came, that Ruth should go away to school. She selected a large New England seminary, of which she had often heard Philip speak, which was attended by both sexes and offered almost collegiate advantages of education. Thither she went in September, and began for the second time in the year a life new to her. The seminary was the chief feature of Fallkill, a village of 2,000 to 3,000 inhabitants. It was a prosperous school, with 300 students, a large corps of teachers, men and women, and with a venerable rusty row of academic buildings on the shaded square of the town. The students lodged and boarded in private families in the place, and so it came about that while the school did a great deal to support the town gave the students society and the sweet influences of home life. It is at least respectful to say that the influences of home life are sweet. Ruth's home, by the intervention of Philip, was in a family, one of the rare exceptions in life or in fiction, that had never known better days. The Montagues, it is perhaps well to say, had intended to come over in the Mayflower, but were detained at Delft Haven by the illness of a child. They came over to Massachusetts Bay in another vessel, and thus escaped the onus of that brevet nobility under which the successors of the Mayflower Pilgrims have descended. Having no factitious weight of dignity to carry, the Montagues steadily improved their condition from the day they landed, and they were never more vigorous or prosperous than at the date of this narrative. With character compacted by the rigid Puritan discipline of more than 2 centuries, they had retained its strength and purity and thrown off its narrowness, and were now blossoming under the generous modern influences. Squire Oliver Montague, a lawyer who had retired from the practice of his profession, except in rare cases, dwelt in a square old-fashioned New England mansion a quarter of a mile away from the green. It was called a mansion because it stood alone with ample fields about it, and had an avenue of trees leading to it from the road, and on the west commanded a view of a pretty little lake with gentle slopes and nodding, were now blossoming under the generous modern influences. But it was just a plain, roomy house, capable of extending to many guests and unpretending hospitality. The family consisted of the squire and his wife, a son and a daughter married and not at home, a son in college at Cambridge, another son at the seminary, and a daughter Alice, who was a year or more older than Ruth. Having only riches enough to be able to gratify reasonable desires, and yet make their gratifications always a novelty and a pleasure, the family occupied that just mean in life which is so rarely attained, and still more rarely enjoyed without discontent. If Ruth did not find so much luxury in the house as in her own home, there were evidences of culture, of intellectual activity, and of a zest in the affairs of all the world, which greatly impressed her. Every room had its bookcases or bookshelves, and was more or less a library. Upon every table was liable to be a litter of new books, fresh periodicals, and daily newspapers. There were plants in the sunny windows, and some choice engravings on the walls, with bits of color in oil or watercolors. The piano was sure to be open and strewn with music, and there were photographs and little souvenirs here and there of foreign travel. An absence of any what pots, in the corners with rows of cheerful shells, and Hindu gods, and Chinese idols, and nests of useless boxes of lacquered wood, might be taken as denoting a languidness in the family concerning foreign missions, but perhaps unjustly. At any rate, the life of the world flowed freely into this hospitable house, and there was always so much talk there of the news of the day, of the new books and of authors, of Boston radicalism and New York civilization, and the virtue of Congress, that small gossip stood a very poor chance. All this was in many ways so new to Ruth that she seemed to have passed into another world, in which she experienced a freedom and a mental exhilaration unknown to her before. Under this influence, she entered upon her studies with keen enjoyment, finding for a time all the relaxation she needed in the charming social life at the Montague house. "It is strange," she wrote to Philip in one of her occasional letters, "that you never told me more about this delightful family, and scarcely mentioned Alice, who is the life of it. Just the noblest girl, unselfish, knows how to do so many things, with lots of talent, with a dry humor and an odd way of looking at things, and yet quiet and even serious often, one of your capable New England girls. We shall be great friends." It had never occurred to Philip that there was anything extraordinary about the family that needed mention. He knew dozens of girls like Alice, he thought to himself, but only one like Ruth. Good friends, the two girls were from the beginning. Ruth was a study to Alice, the product of a culture entirely foreign to her experience, so much a child in some things, so much a woman in others. And Ruth in turn, it must be confessed, probing Alice sometimes with her serious gray eyes, wondered what her object in life was, and whether she had any purpose beyond living as she now saw her. For she could scarcely conceive of a life that should not be devoted to the accomplishment of some definite work, and she had no doubt that in her own case everything else would yield to the professional career she had marked out. "So you know Philip Sterling," said Ruth one day as the girls sat at their sewing. Ruth never embroidered and never sewed when she could avoid it. Bless her. "Oh yes, we are old friends. Philip used to come to Falkhill often while he was in college. He was once rusticated here for a term." Rusticated. Suspended for some college scrape. He was a great favorite here. Father and he were famous friends. Father said that Philip had no end of nonsense in him and was always blundering into something, but he was a royal good fellow and would come out all right. "Did you think he was fickle?" "Why, I never thought whether he was or not," replied Alice, looking up. "I suppose he was always in love with some girl or another, as college boys are. He used to make me his confidant now and then, and be terribly in the dumps." "Why did he come to you?" pursued Ruth. "You were younger than he." "I'm sure I don't know. He was at our house a good deal. Once at a picnic by the lake, at the risk of his own life, he saved Sister Millie from drowning, and we all liked to have him here. Perhaps he thought, as he had saved one sister, The other ought to help him when he was in trouble. I don't know. The fact was that Alice was a person who invited confidences because she never betrayed them and gave abundant sympathy in return. There are persons, whom we all know, to whom human confidences, troubles, and heartaches flow as naturally as streams to a placid lake. This is not a history of Falkirk, nor of the Montague family, worthy as both are of that honor, and this narrative cannot be diverted into long loitering with them. If the reader visits the village today, he will doubtless be pointed out the Montague dwelling, where Ruth lived, the crosslots path she traversed to the seminary, and the venerable chapel with its cracked bell. In the little society of the place, the Quaker girl was a favorite, and no considerable social gathering or pleasure party was thought complete without her. There was something in this seemingly transparent and yet deep character, in her childlike gaiety and enjoyment of the society about her, and in her not seldom absorption in herself, that would have made her long remembered there if no events had subsequently occurred to recall her to mind. To the surprise of Alice, Ruth took to the small gaieties of the village with a zest of enjoyment that seemed foreign to one who had devoted her life to a serious profession from the highest motives. Alice liked society well enough, she thought, but there was nothing exciting in that of Falkirk, nor anything novel in the attentions of the well-bred young gentlemen one met in it. It must have worn a different aspect to Ruth, for she entered into its pleasures at first with curiosity, and then with interest, and finally with a kind of staid abandon that no one would have deemed possible for her. Parties, picnics, rowing matches, moonlight strolls, nutting expeditions in the October woods, Alice declared that it was a whirl of dissipation. The fondness of Ruth, which was scarcely disguised, for the company of agreeable young fellows who talked nothings, gave Alice opportunity for no end of banter. "Do you look upon them as I subjects, dear?" she would ask. And Ruth laughed her merriest laugh, and then looked sober again. Perhaps she was thinking, after all, whether she knew herself. If you should rear a duck in the heart of the Sahara, no doubt it would swim if you brought it to the Nile. Surely no one would have predicted, when Ruth left Philadelphia, that she would become absorbed to this extent, and so happy, in a life so unlike that she thought she desired. But no one can tell how a woman will act under any circumstances. The reason novelists nearly always fail in depicting women when they make them act is that they let them do what they have observed some woman has done at some time or another. And that is where they make a mistake, for a woman will never do again what has been done before. It is this uncertainty that causes women, considered as materials for fiction, to be so interesting to themselves and to others. As the fall went on and the winter, Ruth did not distinguish herself greatly at the Falkirk Seminary as a student, a fact that apparently gave her no anxiety and did not diminish her enjoyment of a new sort of power which had awakened within her. Chapter 22. In midwinter, an event occurred of unusual interest to the inhabitants of the Montague house and to the friends of the young ladies who sought their society. This was the arrival at the Sasakua Hotel of two young gentlemen from the West. It is the fashion in New England to give Indian names to the public houses, not that the late lamented Savage knew how to keep a hotel, but that his warlike name may impress the traveler who humbly craves shelter there, and make him grateful to the noble and gentlemanly clerk if he is allowed to depart with his scalp safe. The two young gentlemen were neither students for the Falkirk Seminary, nor lecturers on physiology, nor yet life assurance solicitors, three suppositions that almost exhausted the guessing power of the people at the hotel in respect to the names of Philip Sterling and Henry Brierly, Missouri, on the register. They were handsome enough fellows, that was evident, browned by outdoor exposure, and with a free and lordly way about them that almost awed the hotel clerk himself. Indeed, he very soon set down Mr. Brierly as a gentleman of large fortune, with enormous interests on his shoulders. Harry had a way of casually mentioning Western investments, through lines, the freighting business, and the route through the Indian Territory to Lower California, which was calculated to give an importance to his lightest word. "You've a pleasant town here, sir, and the most comfortable-looking hotel I've seen out of New York," said Harry to the clerk, We shall stay here a few days if you can give us a roomy suite of apartments. Harry usually had the best of everything wherever he went, as such fellows always do have in this accommodating world. Philip would have been quite content with less expensive quarters, but there was no resisting Harry's generosity in such matters. Railroad surveying and real estate operations were at a standstill during the winter in Missouri, and the young men had taken advantage of the lull to come east, Philip to see if there was any disposition in his friends, the railway contractors, to give him a share in the Salt Lick Union Pacific Extension, and Harry to open out to his uncle the prospects of the new city at Stone's Landing, and to procure congressional appropriations for the harbor and for making Goose Run navigable. Harry had with him a map of that noble stream and of the harbor, with a perfect network of railroads centering in it, pictures of wharves crowded with steamboats and of huge grain elevators on the bank, all of which grew out of the combined imaginations of Carl Sellers and Mr. Brierly. The colonel had entire confidence in Harry's influence with Wall Street and with congressmen to bring about the consummation of their scheme, and he waited his return in the empty house at Hawkeye, feeding his pinched family upon the most gorgeous expectations with a reckless prodigality. "Don't let him into the thing more than is necessary," says the colonel to Harry. "Give him a small interest. A lot apiece in the suburbs of the Landing ought to do a congressman, but I reckon you'll have to mortgage a part of the city itself to the brokers." Harry did not find that eagerness to lend money on Stone's Landing in Wall Street, which Carl Sellers had expected. It had seen too many such maps as he exhibited, although his uncle and some of the brokers looked with more favor on the appropriation for improving the navigation of Columbus River, and were not disinclined to form a company for that purpose. An appropriation was a tangible thing if you could get hold of it, and it made little difference what it was appropriated for, so long as you got hold of it. Pending these weighty negotiations, Philip has persuaded Harry to take a little run up to Fallkill, a not difficult task, for that young man would at any time have turned his back upon all the land in the west at sight of a new and pretty face, and he had, it must be confessed, a facility in love-making which made it not at all an interference with the more serious business of life. He could not, to be sure, conceive how Philip could be interested in a young lady who was studying medicine, but he had no objection to going, for he did not doubt that there were other girls in Fallkill who were worth a week's attention. The young men were received at the house of the Montagues with the hospitality which never failed there. "We are glad to see you again," exclaimed the squire heartily. "You are welcome, Mr. Brierly. Any friend of Phil's is welcome at our house." "It's more like home to me than any place except my own home," cried Philip, as he looked about the cheerful house and went through a general handshaking. "It's a long time, though, since you have been here to say so," Alice said, with her father's frankness of manner, "and I suspect we owe the visit now to your sudden interest in the Fallkill Seminary." Philip's color came, as it had an awkward way of doing in his telltale face, but before he could stammer a reply, Harry came in with, "That accounts for Phil's wish to build a seminary at Stone's Landing, our place in Missouri, when Carl Sellers insisted it should be a university. Phil appears to have a weakness for seminaries." "It would have been better for your friend Sellers," retorted Philip, "if he had had a weakness for district schools. Carl Sellers, Miss Alice, is a great friend of Harry's, who is always trying to build a house by beginning at the top." "I suppose it's as easy to build a university on paper as a seminary, and it looks better," was Harry's reflection, at which the squire laughed and said he quite agreed with him. The old gentleman understood Stone's Landing a good deal better than he would have done after an hour's talk with either of its expectant proprietors. At this moment, and while Philip was trying to frame a question that he found it exceedingly difficult to put into words, the door opened quietly and Ruth entered. Taking in the group with a quick glance, her eye lighted up, and with a merry smile she advanced and shook hands with Philip. She was so unconstrained and sincerely cordial that it made that hero of the West feel somehow young and very ill at ease. For months and months he had thought of this meeting and pictured it to himself 100 times, but he had never imagined it would be like this. He should meet Ruth unexpectedly, as she was walking alone from the school, perhaps, or entering the room where he was waiting for her, and she would cry, "Oh," Phil, and then check herself, and perhaps blush, and Philip, calm but eager and enthusiastic, would reassure her by his warm manner, and he would take her hand impressively, and she would look up timidly, and after his long absence, perhaps he would be permitted to. Good heavens, how many times he had come to this point, and wondered if it could happen so. Well, he had never supposed that he should be the one embarrassed, and above all by a sincere and cordial welcome. "We heard you were at the Sasaka's house," were Ruth's first words, "and this, I suppose, is your friend." "I beg your pardon," Philip at length blundered out. "This is Mr. Brierly, of whom I have written you." And Ruth welcomed Harry with a friendliness that Philip thought was due to his friend, to be sure, but which seemed to him too level with her reception of himself, but which Harry received as his due from the other sex. Questions were asked about the journey and about the West, and the conversation became a general one, until Philip at length found himself talking with the squire in relation to land and railroads and things he couldn't keep his mind on, especially as he heard Ruth and Harry in an animated discourse, and caught the words New York, and opera, and reception, and knew that Harry was giving his imagination full range in the world of fashion. Harry knew all about the opera, green room, and all, at least he said so, and knew a good many of the operas, and could make very entertaining stories of their plots, telling how the soprano came in here, and the basso here, humming the beginning of their airs, tum-tee, suggesting the profound dissatisfaction of the bass recitative down among the dead men, and touching off the whole with an airy grace quite captivating, though he couldn't have sung a single air through to save himself, and he hadn't an ear to know whether it was sung correctly. All the same, he doted on the opera, and kept a box there, into which he lounged occasionally to hear a favorite scene and meet his society friends. If Ruth was ever in the city, he should be happy to place his box at the disposal of Ruth and her friends. Needless to say that she was delighted with the offer. When she told Philip of it, that discreet young fellow only smiled, and said that he hoped she would be fortunate enough to be in New York some evening, when Harry had not already given the use of his private box to some other friend. The squire pressed the visitors to let him send for their trunks and urged them to stay at his house, and Alice joined in the invitation, but Philip had reasons for declining. They stayed to supper, however, and in the evening Philip had a long talk apart with Ruth, a delightful hour to him, in which she spoke freely of herself as of old, of her studies at Philadelphia and of her plans, and she entered into his adventures and prospects in the West with a genuine and almost sisterly interest. An interest, however, which did not exactly satisfy Philip. It was too general and not personal enough to suit him. And with all her freedom in speaking of her own hopes, Philip could not detect any reference to himself in them, whereas he never undertook anything that he did not think of Ruth in connection with it. He never made a plan that had not reference to her, and he never thought of anything as complete if she could not share it. Fortune, reputation, these had no value to him except in Ruth's eyes, and there were times when it seemed to him that if Ruth was not on this earth, he should plunge off into some remote wilderness and live in a purposeless seclusion. "I hoped," said Philip, "to get a little start in connection with this new railroad and make a little money so that I could come east and engage in something more suited to my tastes. I shouldn't like to live in the West, would you?" "It never occurred to me whether I would or not," was the unembarrassed reply. "One of our graduates went to Chicago and has a nice practice there. I don't know where I shall go. It would mortify Mother dreadfully to have me driving about Philadelphia in a doctor's gig." Philip laughed at the idea of it. "And does it seem as necessary to you to do it as it did before you came to Falkell?" It was a home question, and went deeper than Philip knew, for Ruth at once thought of practicing her profession among the young gentlemen and ladies of her acquaintance in the village, but she was reluctant to admit to herself that her notions of a career had undergone any change. "Oh, I don't think I should come to Falkell to practice, but I must do something when I am through school, and why not medicine?" Philip would like to have explained why not, but the explanation would be of no use if it were not already obvious to Ruth. Harry was equally in his element, whether instructing Squire Montague about the investment of capital in Missouri, the improvement of Columbus River, the project he and some gentlemen in New York had for making a shorter Pacific connection with the Mississippi than the present one, or diverting Mrs. Montague with his experience in cooking in camp, or drawing for Miss Alice an amusing picture of the social contrasts of New England and the border where he had been. Harry was a very entertaining fellow, having his imagination to help his memory and telling his stories as if he believed them, as perhaps he did. Alice was greatly amused with Harry and listened so seriously to his romancing that he exceeded his usual limits. Chance allusions to his bachelor establishment in town and the place of his family on the Hudson could not have been made by a millionaire more naturally. "I should think," queried Alice, "you would rather stay in New York than to try the rough life at the West you have been speaking of." "Oh, adventure," says Harry. "I get tired of New York, and besides I got involved in some operations that I had to see through. Parties in New York only last week wanted me to go down into Arizona in a big diamond interest. I told them no speculation for me. I've got my interests in Missouri, and I wouldn't leave Philip as long as he stays there." When the young gentlemen were on their way back to the hotel, Mr. Philip, who was not in very good humor, broke out. "What the deuce, Harry, did you go on in that style to the Montagues for?" "Go on," cried Harry. "Why shouldn't I try to make a pleasant evening? And besides, ain't I going to do those things? What difference does it make about the mood and tense of a mere verb? Didn't Uncle tell me only last Saturday that I might as well go down to Arizona and hunt for diamonds? A fellow might as well make a good impression as a poor one." "Nonsense, you'll get to believing your own romancing by and by." "Well, you'll see. When Sellers and I get that appropriation, I'll show you an establishment in town and another on the Hudson and a box at the opera. Yes, it will be like Carl Sellers' plantation at Hawkeye. Did you ever see that?" "Now don't be cross, Phil. She's just superb, that little woman. You never told me." "Who's just superb?" growled Philip, fancying this turn of the conversation less than the other. "Well, Mrs. Montague, if you must know." And Harry stopped to light a cigar and then puffed on in silence. The little quarrel didn't last overnight, for Harry never appeared to cherish any ill will half a second, and Philip was too sensible to continue a row about nothing, and he had invited Harry to come with him. The young gentlemen stayed in Falkirk a week, and were every day at the Montagues, and took part in the winter gaieties of the village. There were parties here and there to which the friends of Ruth and the Montagues were of course invited, and Harry, in the generosity of his nature, gave in return a little supper at the hotel, very simple indeed, with dancing in the hall and some refreshments passed round. And Philip found the whole thing in the bill when he came to pay it. Before the week was over, Philip thought he had a new light on the character of Ruth. Her absorption in the small gaieties of the society there surprised him. He had few opportunities for serious conversation with her. There was always some butterfly or another flitting about, and when Philip showed by his manner that he was not pleased, Ruth laughed merrily enough and rallied him on his soberness. She declared he was getting to be grim and unsocial. He talked indeed more with Alice than with Ruth, and scarcely concealed from her the trouble that was in his mind. It needed, in fact, no word from him, for she saw clearly enough what was going forward, and knew her sex well enough to know there was no remedy for it but time. "Ruth is a dear girl, Philip, and has as much firmness of purpose as ever, but don't you see she has just discovered that she is fond of society? Don't you let her see you are selfish about it, is my advice." The last evening they were to spend in Falkirk, they were at the Montagues, and Philip hoped that he would find Ruth in a different mood. But she was never more gay, and there was a spice of mischief in her eye and in her laugh. "Confound it," said Philip to himself, "she's in a perfect twitter." He would have liked to quarrel with her, and fling himself out of the house in tragedy style, going perhaps so far as to blindly wander off miles into the country and bathe his throbbing brow in the chilling rain of the stars, as people do in novels. But he had no opportunity, for Ruth was as serenely unconscious of mischief as women can be at times, and fascinated him more than ever with her little demurenesses and half-confidences. She even said "thee" to him once in reproach for a cutting speech he began. And the sweet little word made his heart beat like a trip hammer, for never in all her life had she said thee to him before. Was she fascinated with Harry's careless, bonhomie, and gay assurance? Both chatted away in high spirits and made the evening whirl along in the most mirthful manner. Ruth sang for Harry, and that young gentleman turned the leaves for her at the piano and put in a bass note now and then where he thought it would tell. Yes, it was a merry evening, and Philip was heartily glad when it was over, and the long leave-taking with the family was through with. "Farewell, Philip. Good night, Mr. Brierly," Ruth's clear voice sounded after them as they went down the walk. And she spoke Harry's name last, thought Philip. Chapter 23. "Oh, see ye not yon narrow road, so thick beset wi' thorns and briars? That is the path of righteousness, though after it but few inquires. And see ye not yon braid road, that lies across the lily-leven? That is the path of wickedness, though some call it the road to heaven." Thomas the Rhymer. Philip and Harry reached New York in very different states of mind. Harry was buoyant. He found a letter from Carl Sellers urging him to go to Washington and confer with Senator Dilworthy. The petition was in his hands. It had been signed by everybody of any importance in Missouri and would be presented immediately. "I should go on myself," wrote the colonel, "but I am engaged in the invention of a process for lighting such a city as St. Louis by means of water. Just attach my machine to the water pipes anywhere and the decomposition of the fluid begins, and you will have floods of light for the mere cost of the machine. I've nearly got the lighting part, but I want to attach to it a heating, cooking, washing and ironing apparatus. It's going to be the great thing, but we'd better keep this appropriation going while I am perfecting it." Harry took letters to several congressmen from his uncle and from Mr. Duff Brown, each of whom had an extensive acquaintance in both houses where they were well known as men engaged in large private operations for the public good and men, besides, who, in the slang of the day, understood the virtues of addition, division, and silence. Senator Dilworthy introduced the petition into the Senate with the remark that he knew, personally, the signers of it, that they were men interested, it was true, in the improvement of the country, but he believed without any selfish motive, and that so far as he knew the signers were loyal. It pleased him to see upon the roll the names of many colored citizens, and it must rejoice every friend of humanity to know that this lately emancipated race were intelligently taking part in the development of the resources of their native land. He moved the reference of the petition to the proper committee. Senator Dilworthy introduced his young friend to influential members as a person who was very well informed about the Salt Lick extension of the Pacific and was one of the engineers who had made a careful survey of Columbus River and left him to exhibit his maps and plans and to show the connection between the public treasury, the city of Napoleon, and legislation for the benefit of the whole country. Harry was the guest of Senator Dilworthy. There was scarcely any good movement in which the senator was not interested. His house was open to all the laborers in the field of total abstinence, and much of his time was taken up in attending the meetings of this cause. He had a Bible class in the Sunday school of the church which he attended, and he suggested to Harry that he might take a class during the time he remained in Washington. Mr. Washington Hawkins had a class. Harry asked the senator if there was a class of young ladies for him to teach, and after that, the senator did not press the subject. Philip, if the truth must be told, was not well satisfied with his Western prospects, nor altogether with the people he had fallen in with. The railroad contractors held out large, but rather indefinite promises. Opportunities for a fortune he did not doubt existed in Missouri, but for himself, he saw no better means for livelihood than the mastery of the profession he had rather thoughtlessly entered upon. During the summer, he had made considerable practical advance in the science of engineering. He had been diligent and made himself to a certain extent necessary to the work he was engaged on. The contractors called him into their consultations frequently, as to the character of the country he had been over, and the cost of constructing the road, the nature of the work, etc. Still, Philip felt that if he was going to make either reputation or money as an engineer, he had a great deal of hard study before him, and it is to his credit that he did not shrink from it. While Harry was in Washington dancing attendance upon the national legislature and making the acquaintance of the vast lobby that encircled it, Philip devoted himself day and night, with an energy and a concentration he was capable of, to the learning and theory of his profession and to the science of railroad building. He wrote some papers at this time for the plow, the loom, and the anvil, upon the strength of materials, and especially upon bridge building, which attracted considerable attention, and were copied into the English Practical magazine. They served at any rate to raise Philip in the opinion of his friends the contractors, for practical men have a certain superstitious estimation of ability with the pen, and though they may a little despise the talent, they are quite ready to make use of it. Philip sent copies of his performances to Ruth's father and to other gentlemen whose good opinion he coveted, but he did not rest upon his laurels. Indeed, so diligently had he applied himself that when it came time for him to return to the West, he felt himself, at least in theory, competent to take charge of a division in the field. Chapter 24. The capital of the great republic was a new world to country-bred Washington Hawkins. St. Louis was a greater city, but its floating population did not hail from great distances, and so it had the general family aspect of the permanent population. But Washington gathered its people from the four winds of heaven, and so the manners, the faces, and the fashions there presented a variety that was infinite. Washington had never been in society in St. Louis, and he knew nothing of the ways of its wealthier citizens and had never inspected one of their dwellings. Consequently, everything in the nature of modern fashion and grandeur was a new and wonderful revelation to him. Washington is an interesting city to any of us. It seems to become more and more interesting the oftener we visit it. Perhaps the reader has never been there. Very well. You arrive either at night, rather too late to do anything or see anything until morning, or you arrive so early in the morning that you consider it best to go to your hotel and sleep an hour or two while the sun bothers along over the Atlantic. You cannot well arrive at a pleasant intermediate hour, because the railway corporation that keeps the keys of the only door that leads into the town or out of it take care of that. You arrive in tolerably good spirits, because it is only 38 miles from Baltimore to the capital, and so you have only been insulted 3 times, provided you are not in a sleeping car. The average is higher there. Once when you renewed your ticket after stopping over in Baltimore. Once when you were about to enter the ladies' car without knowing it was a ladies' car. And once when you asked the conductor at what hour you would reach Washington. You are assailed by a long rank of hackmen who shake their whips in your face as you step out upon the sidewalk. You enter what they regard as a carriage in the capital, and you wonder why they do not take it out of service and put it in the museum. We have few enough antiquities, and it is little to our credit that we make scarcely any effort to preserve the few we have. You reach your hotel presently, and here let us draw the curtain of charity, because of course you have gone to the wrong one. You being a stranger, how could you do otherwise? There are 118 bad hotels, and only one good one. The most renowned and popular hotel of them all is perhaps the worst one known to history. It is winter and night. When you arrived, it was snowing. When you reached the hotel, it was sleeting. When you went to bed, it was raining. During the night, it froze hard, and the wind blew some chimneys down. When you got up in the morning, it was foggy. When you finished your breakfast at 10 o'clock and went out, the sunshine was brilliant, the weather balmy and delicious, and the mud and slush deep and all-pervading. You will like the climate when you get used to it. You naturally wish to view the city, so you take an umbrella, an overcoat, and a fan, and go forth. The prominent features you soon locate and get familiar with. First, you glimpse the ornamental upper works of a long, snowy palace projecting above a grove of trees, and a tall, graceful white dome with a statue on it surmounting the palace, and pleasantly contrasting with the background of blue sky. That building is the Capitol. Gossips will tell you that by the original estimates, it was to cost $12 million, and that the government did come within $21,200,000 of building it for that sum. You stand at the back of the Capitol to treat yourself to a view, and it is a very noble one. You understand, the Capitol stands upon the verge of a high piece of table land, a fine commanding position, and its front looks out over this noble situation for a city. But it don't see it, for the reason that when the Capitol extension was decided upon, the property owners at once advanced their prices to such inhuman figures that the people went down and built the city in the muddy low marsh behind the Temple of Liberty. So now the lordly front of the building, with its imposing colonnades, its projecting graceful wings, its picturesque groups of statuary, and its long terraced ranges of steps, flowing down in white marble waves to the ground, merely looks out upon a sorrowful little desert of cheap boarding houses. So you observe that you take your view from the back of the Capitol, and yet not from the airy outlooks of the dome, by the way, because to get there you must pass through the great rotunda, and to do that you would have to see the marvelous historical paintings that hang there and the bas-reliefs, and what have you done that you should suffer thus? And besides, you might have to pass through the old part of the building, and you could not help seeing Mr. Lincoln as petrified by a young lady artist for $10,000, and you might take his marble Emancipation Proclamation, which he holds out in his hand and contemplates, for a folded napkin, and you might conceive from his expression and his attitude that he is finding fault with the washing, which is not the case. Nobody knows what is the matter with him, but everybody feels for him. Well, you ought not to go into the dome anyhow, because it would be utterly impossible to go up there without seeing the frescoes in it, and why should you be interested in the delirium tremens of art? The Capitol is a very noble and a very beautiful building, both within and without, but you need not examine it now. Still, if you greatly prefer going into the dome, go. Now your general glance gives you picturesque stretches of gleaming water, on your left, with a sail here and there, and a lunatic asylum on shore. Over beyond the water, on a distant elevation, you see a squat yellow temple which your eye dwells upon lovingly through a blur of unmanly moisture, for it recalls your lost boyhood and the Parthenons done in molasses candy, which made it blessed and beautiful. Still in the distance, but on this side of the water and close to its edge, the monument to the father of his country towers out of the mud. Sacred soil is the customary term. It has the aspect of a factory chimney with the top broken off. The skeleton of a decaying scaffolding lingers about its summit, and tradition says that the spirit of Washington often comes down and sits on those rafters to enjoy this tribute of respect which the nation has reared as the symbol of its unappeasable gratitude. The monument is to be finished someday, and at that time our Washington will have risen still higher in the nation's veneration, and will be known as the great-great-grandfather of his country. The memorial chimney stands in a quiet pastoral locality that is full of reposeful expression. With a glass, you can see the cowsheds about its base, and the contented sheep nibbling pebbles in the desert solitudes that surround it, and the tired pigs dozing in the holy calm of its protecting shadow. Now you wrench your gaze loose, and you look down in front of you and see the broad Pennsylvania Avenue stretching straight ahead for a mile or more, till it brings up against the iron fence in front of a pillared granite pile, the Treasury Building, an edifice that would command respect in any capital. The stores and hotels that wall in this broad avenue are mean and cheap and dingy and are better left without comment. Beyond the Treasury is a fine large white barn with wide unhandsome grounds about it. The president lives there. It is ugly enough outside, but that is nothing to what it is inside. Dreariness, flimsiness, bad taste reduced to mathematical completeness is what the inside offers to the eye, if it remains yet what it always has been. The front and right-hand views give you the city at large. It is a wide stretch of cheap little brick houses, with here and there a noble architectural pile lifting itself out of the midst, government buildings, these. If the thaw is still going on when you come down and go about town, you will wonder at the short-sightedness of the city fathers when you come to inspect the streets, in that they do not dilute the mud a little more and use them for canals. If you inquire around a little, you will find that there are more boarding houses to the square acre in Washington than there are in any other city in the land, perhaps. If you apply for a home in one of them, it will seem odd to you to have the landlady inspect you with a severe eye and then ask you if you are a member of Congress. Perhaps, just as a pleasantry, you will say yes. and then she will tell you that she is full. Then you show her advertisement in the morning paper, and there she stands, convicted and ashamed. She will try to blush, and it will be only polite in you to take the effort for the deed. She shows you her rooms now and lets you take one, but she makes you pay in advance for it. That is what you will get for pretending to be a member of Congress. If you had been content to be merely a private citizen, your trunk would have been sufficient security for your board. If you are curious and inquire into this thing, the chances are that your landlady will be ill-natured enough to say that the person and property of a congressman are exempt from arrest or detention, and that with the tears in her eyes, she has seen several of the people's representatives walk off to their several states and territories carrying her unreceipted board bills in their pockets for keepsakes. And before you have been in Washington many weeks, you will be mean enough to believe her, too. Of course, you contrive to see everything and find out everything. And one of the first and most startling things you find out is that every individual you encounter in the city of Washington almost, and certainly every separate and distinct individual in the public employment, from the highest bureau chief, clear down to the maid who scrubs department halls, the night watchman of the public buildings, and the darky boy who purifies the department spittoons, represents political influence. Unless you can get the ear of a senator or a congressman or a chief of a bureau or department and persuade him to use his influence in your behalf, you cannot get an employment of the most trivial nature in Washington. Mere merit, fitness, and capability are useless baggage to you without influence. The population of Washington consists pretty much entirely of government employees and the people who board them. There are thousands of these employees, and they have gathered there from every corner of the Union and got their berths through the intercession, command is nearer the word, of the senators and representatives of their respective states. It would be an odd circumstance to see a girl get employment at $3 or $4 a week in one of the great public cribs without any political grandee to back her, but merely because she was worthy and competent and a good citizen of a free country that treats all persons alike. Washington would be mildly thunderstruck at such a thing as that. If you are a member of Congress, no offense, and one of your constituents who doesn't know anything and does not want to go into the bother of learning something, and has no money and no employment and can't earn a living, comes besieging you for help, do you say, "Come, my friend, if your services were valuable you could get employment. Elsewhere don't want you here." Oh no, you take him to a department and say, "Here, give this person something to pass away the time at, and a salary," and the thing is done. You throw him on his country. He is his country's child, let his country support him. There is something good and motherly about Washington, the grand old benevolent national asylum for the helpless. The wages received by this great hive of employees are placed at the liberal figure meet, and just for skilled and competent labor. Such of them as are immediately employed about the two houses of Congress are not only liberally paid also, but are remembered in the customary extra compensation bill which slides neatly through, annually, with the general grab that signalizes the last night of a session, and thus 20% is added to their wages, for fun, no doubt. Washington Hawkins' new life was an unceasing delight to him. Senator Dilworthy lived sumptuously, and Washington's quarters were charming. Gas, running water hot and cold, bathroom, coal fires, rich carpets, beautiful pictures on the walls, books on religion, temperance, public charities, and financial schemes, trim-colored servants, dainty food, everything a body could wish for. And as for stationery, there was no end to it. The government furnished it. Postage stamps were not needed. The senator's frank could convey a horse through the mails if necessary. And then he saw such dazzling company. Renowned generals and admirals who had seemed but colossal myths when he was in the far west went in and out before him or sat at the senator's table, solidified into palpable flesh and blood. Famous statesmen crossed his path daily. That once rare and awe-inspiring being, a congressman, was become a common spectacle, a spectacle so common, indeed, that he could contemplate it without excitement, even without embarrassment. Foreign ministers were visible to the naked eye at happy intervals. He had looked upon the president himself and lived. And more, this world of enchantment teemed with speculation. The whole atmosphere was thick with it, and that indeed was Washington Hawkins' native air. None other refreshed his lungs so gratefully. He had found paradise at last. The more he saw of his chief, the senator, the more he honored him, and the more conspicuously, the moral grandeur of his character appeared to stand out. To possess the friendship and the kindly interest of such a man, Washington said in a letter to Louise, was a happy fortune for a young man whose career had been so impeded and so clouded as his. The weeks drifted by. Harry Brierly flirted, danced, added luster to the brilliant senatorial receptions, and diligently buzzed and buttonholed congressmen in the interest of the Columbus River scheme. Meantime, Senator Dilworthy labored hard in the same interest, and in others of equal national importance. Harry wrote frequently to Sellers, and always encouragingly, and from these letters it was easy to see that Harry was a pet with all Washington and was likely to carry the thing through, that the assistance rendered him by old Dilworthy was pretty fair, and every little helps, you know, said Harry. Washington wrote Sellers officially now and then. In one of his letters, it appeared that whereas no member of the House committee favored the scheme at first, there was now needed but one more vote to compass a majority report. Closing sentence. Providence seems to further our efforts. Signed, Abner Dilworthy, USS. Per Washington Hawkins, P.S. At the end of a week, Washington was able to send the happy news, officially, as usual, that the needed vote had been added and the bill favorably reported from the committee. Other letters recorded its perils in committee of the whole, and by its victory, by just the skin of its teeth, on third reading and final passage. Then came letters telling of Mr. Dilworthy's struggles with a stubborn majority in his own committee in the Senate, of how these gentlemen succumbed, one by one, till a majority was secured. Then there was a hiatus. Washington watched every move on the board, and he was in a good position to do this, for he was clerk of this committee and also one other. He received no salary as private secretary, but these two clerkships, procured by his benefactor, paid him an aggregate of $12 a day, without counting the 20% extra compensation, which would of course be voted to him on the last night of the session. He saw the bill go into committee of the whole and struggle for its life again, and finally worry through. In the fullness of time, he noted its second reading, and by the day arrived when the grand ordeal came, and it was put upon its final passage. Washington listened with bated breath to the aye, no, aye of the voters for a few dread minutes, and then could bear the suspense no longer. He ran down from the gallery and hurried home to wait. At the end of 2 or 3 hours, the senator arrived in the bosom of his family, and dinner was waiting. Washington sprang forward with the eager question on his lips, and the senator said, "We may rejoice freely now, my son. Providence has crowned our efforts with success." Chapter 25. Washington sent grand good news to Carl Sellers that night. To Louise, he wrote, "It is beautiful to hear him talk when his heart is full of thankfulness for some manifestation of the divine favor. You shall know him some day, my Louise, and knowing him you will honor him as I do." Harry wrote, "I pulled it through, Colonel, but it was a tough job, there is no question about that. There was not a friend to the measure in the House committee when I began, and not a friend in the Senate committee except old Dill himself, but they were all fixed for a majority report when I hauled off my forces. Everybody here says you can't get a thing like this through Congress without buying committees for straight-out cash on delivery, but I think I've taught them a thing or two if I could only make them believe it. When I tell the old residenters that this thing went through without buying a vote or making a promise, they say, that's rather too thin. And when I say thin or not thin, it's a fact anyway, they say, come now, but do you really believe that? And when I say I don't believe anything about it, I know it, they smile and say, well, you are pretty innocent or pretty blind, one or the other, there's no getting around that. Why, they really do believe that votes have been bought, they do indeed, but let them keep on thinking so. I have found out that if a man knows how to talk to women and has a little gift in the way of argument with men, he can afford to play for an appropriation against a money bag and give the money bag odds in the game. We've raked in $200,000 of Uncle Sam's money, say what they will, and there is more where this came from when we want it, and I rather fancy I am the person that can go in and occupy it too, if I do say it myself, that shouldn't, perhaps. I'll be with you within a week. Scare up all the men you can, and put them to work at once. When I get there, I propose to make things hum." The great news lifted Sellers into the clouds. He went to work on the instant. He flew hither and thither, making contracts, engaging men, and steeping his soul in the ecstasies of business. He was the happiest man in Missouri, and Louise was the happiest woman, for presently came a letter from Washington which said, "Rejoice with me, for the long agony is over. We have waited patiently and faithfully all these years, and now at last the reward is at hand. A man is to pay our family $40,000 for the Tennessee land. It is but a little sum compared to what we could get by waiting, but I do so long to see the day when I can call you my own, that I have said to myself, better take this and enjoy life in a humble way than wear out our best days in this miserable separation. Besides, I can put this money into operations here that will increase it 100-fold, yes, 1,000-fold, in a few months. The air is full of such chances, and I know our family would consent in a moment that I should put in their shares with mine. Without a doubt, we shall be worth $500,000 in a year from this time. I put it at the very lowest figure, because it is always best to be on the safe side. $500,000 at the very lowest calculation, and then your father will give his consent, and we can marry at last. Oh, that will be a glorious day. Tell our friends the good news. I want all to share it." And she did tell her father and mother, but they said, let it be kept still for the present. The careful father also told her to write Washington and warn him not to speculate with the money, but to wait a little and advise with one or two wise old heads. She did this, and she managed to keep the good news to herself, though it would seem that the most careless observer might have seen by her springing step and her radiant countenance that some fine piece of good fortune had descended upon her. Harry joined the colonel at Stone's Landing, and that dead place sprang into sudden life. A swarm of men were hard at work, and the dull air was filled with the cheery music of labor. Harry had been constituted engineer-in-general, and he threw the full strength of his powers into his work. He moved among his hirelings like a king. Authority seemed to invest him with a new splendor. Carl Sellers, as general superintendent of a great public enterprise, was all that a mere human being could be, and more. These two grandees went at their imposing improvement with the air of men who had been charged with the work of altering the foundations of the globe. They turned their first attention to straightening the river just above the landing, where it made a deep bend, and where the maps and plans showed that the process of straightening would not only shorten distance, but increase the fall. They started a cut-off canal across the peninsula formed by the bend, and such another tearing up of the earth and slopping around in the mud as followed the order to the men, had never been seen in that region before. There was such a panic among the turtles that at the end of 6 hours there was not one to be found within 3 miles of Stone's Landing. They took the young and the aged, the decrepit and the sick upon their backs, and left for Tidewater in disorderly procession, the tadpoles following and the bullfrogs bringing up the rear. Saturday night came, but the men were obliged to wait, because the appropriation had not come. Harry said he had written to hurry up the money, and it would be along presently, so the work continued on Monday. Stone's Landing was making quite a stir in the vicinity by this time. Sellers threw a lot or two on the market as a feeler, and they sold well. He reclothed his family, laid in a good stock of provisions, and still had money left. He started a bank account in a small way and mentioned the deposit casually to friends, and to strangers too, to everybody in fact, but not as a new thing, on the contrary, as a matter of lifelong standing. He could not keep from buying trifles every day that were not wholly necessary. It was such a gaudy thing to get out his bank book and draw a check, instead of using his old customary formula, charge it. Harry sold a lot or two, also, and had a dinner party or two at Hawkeye and a general good time with the money. Both men held on pretty strenuously for the coming big prices, however. At the end of a month things were looking bad. Harry had besieged the New York headquarters of the Columbus River Slackwater Navigation Company with demands, then commands, and finally appeals, but to no purpose. The appropriation did not come. The letters were not even answered. The workmen were clamorous now. The colonel and Harry retired to consult. "What's to be done?" said the colonel. "Hanged if I know. Company say anything?" "Not a word. You telegraphed yesterday." Yes, and the day before too. No answer. None can found them. Then there was a long pause. Finally both spoke at once. I've got it. I've got it. What's yours? Said Harry. Give the boys 30-day orders on the company for the back pay. That's it, that's my own idea to a dot. But then. Yes, I know, said the colonel. I know they can't wait for the orders to go to New York and be cashed, but what's the reason they can't get them discounted in Hawkeye? Of course they can. That solves the difficulty. Everybody knows the appropriation's been made and the company's perfectly good. So the orders were given and the men appeased, though they grumbled a little at first. The orders went well enough for groceries and such things at a fair discount, and the work danced along gaily for a time. 2 or 3 purchasers put up frame houses at the landing and moved in, and of course, a far-sighted but easygoing journeyman printer wandered along and started the Napoleon Weekly Telegraph and Literary Repository, a paper with a Latin motto from the unabridged dictionary, and plenty of fat conversational tales and double-leaded poetry, all for $2 a year, strictly in advance. Of course, the merchants forwarded the orders at once to New York, and never heard of them again. At the end of some weeks, Harry's orders were a drug in the market. Nobody would take them at any discount whatever. The second month closed with a riot. Sellers was absent at the time, and Harry began an active absence himself with the mob at his heels, but being on horseback, he had the advantage. He did not tarry in Hawkeye, but went on, thus missing several appointments with creditors. He was far on his flight eastward, and well out of danger when the next morning dawned. He telegraphed the colonel to go down and quiet the laborers. He was bound east for money. Everything would be right in a week. Tell the men so, tell them to rely on him and not be afraid. Sellers found the mob quiet enough when he reached the landing. They had gutted the navigation office, then piled the beautiful engraved stock books and things in the middle of the floor and enjoyed the bonfire while it lasted. They had a liking for the colonel, but still, they had some idea of hanging him as a sort of makeshift that might answer, after a fashion, in place of more satisfactory game. But they made the mistake of waiting to hear what he had to say first. Within 15 minutes, his tongue had done its work, and they were all rich men. He gave every one of them a lot in the suburbs of the city of Stone's Landing, within 1.5 miles of the future post office and railway station, and they promised to resume work as soon as Harry got east and started the money along. Now things were blooming and pleasant again, but the men had no money and nothing to live on. The colonel divided with them the money he still had in bank, an act which had nothing surprising about it, because he was generally ready to divide whatever he had with anybody that wanted it, and it was owing to this very trait that his family spent their days in poverty and at times were pinched with famine. When the men's minds had cooled and Sellers was gone, they hated themselves for letting him beguile them with fine speeches, but it was too late now. They agreed to hang him another time, such time as Providence should appoint. Chapter 26. Rumors of Ruth's frivolity and worldliness at Fallkill traveled to Philadelphia in due time, and occasioned no little undertalk among the Bolton relatives. Hannah Shoecraft told another cousin that, for her part, she never believed that Ruth had so much more mind than other people, and Cousin Huldah added that she always thought Ruth was fond of admiration, and that was the reason she was unwilling to wear plain clothes and attend meeting. The story that Ruth was engaged to a young gentleman of fortune in Fallkill came with the other news, and helped to give point to the little satirical remarks that went round about Ruth's desire to be a doctor. Margaret Bolton was too wise to be either surprised or alarmed by these rumors. They might be true. She knew a woman's nature too well to think them improbable, but she also knew how steadfast Ruth was in her purposes, and that, as a brook breaks into ripples and eddies and dances and sports by the way, and yet keeps on to the sea, it was in Ruth's nature to give back cheerful answer to the solicitations of friendliness and pleasure, to appear idly delaying even and sporting in the sunshine, while the current of her resolution flowed steadily on. That Ruth had this delight in the mere surface play of life, that she could, for instance, be interested in that somewhat serious byplay called flirtation, or take any delight in the exercise of those little arts of pleasing and winning which are none the less genuine and charming because they are not intellectual. Ruth herself had never suspected until she went to Falkirk. She had believed it her duty to subdue her gaiety of temperament and let nothing divert her from what are called serious pursuits. In her limited experience, she brought everything to the judgment of her own conscience and settled the affairs of all the world in her own serene judgment hall. Perhaps her mother saw this, and saw also that there was nothing in the Friends' society to prevent her from growing more and more opinionated. When Ruth returned to Philadelphia, it must be confessed, though it would not have been by her, that a medical career did seem a little less necessary for her than formerly, and coming back in a glow of triumph, as it were, and in the consciousness of the freedom and life in a lively society and in new and sympathetic friendship, she anticipated pleasure in an attempt to break up the stiffness and levelness of the society at home, and infusing into it something of the motion and sparkle which was so agreeable at Falkirk. She expected visits from her new friends, she would have company, the new books, and the periodicals about which all the world was talking, and, in short, she would have life. For a little while she lived in this atmosphere which she had brought with her. Her mother was delighted with this change in her, with the improvement in her health and the interest she exhibited in home affairs. Her father enjoyed the society of his favorite daughter as he did few things besides. He liked her mirthful and teasing ways, and not less a keen battle over something she had read. He had been a great reader all his life, and a remarkable memory had stored his mind with encyclopedic information. It was one of Ruth's delights to cram herself with some out-of-the-way subject and endeavor to catch her father, but she almost always failed. Mr. Bolton liked company, a house full of it, and the mirth of young people, and he would have willingly entered into any revolutionary plans Ruth might have suggested in relation to Friends' society. The custom and the fixed order are stronger than the most enthusiastic and rebellious young lady, as Ruth very soon found. In spite of all her brave efforts, her frequent correspondence, and her determined animation, her books and her music, she found herself settling into the clutches of the old monotony, and as she realized the hopelessness of her endeavors, the medical scheme took new hold of her, and seemed to her the only method of escape. Mother, thee does not know how different it is in Falkirk, how much more interesting the people are one meets, how much more life there is. But thee will find the world, child, pretty much all the same, when thee knows it better. I thought once as thee does now, and had as little thought of being a friend as thee has. Perhaps when thee has seen more, thee will better appreciate a quiet life. Thee married young. I shall not marry young, and perhaps not at all, said Ruth, with a look of vast experience. Perhaps thee doesn't know thee own mind. I have known persons of thy age who did not. Did thee see anybody whom thee would like to live with always in Falkirk? Not always, replied Ruth with a little laugh. Mother, I think I wouldn't say always to anyone until I have a profession and am as independent as he is. Then my love would be a free act and not in any way a necessity. Margaret Bolton smiled at this newfangled philosophy. Thee will find that love, Ruth, is a thing thee won't reason about when it comes, nor make any bargains about. Thee wrote that Philip Sterling was at Falkirk. Yes, and Henry Brierly, a friend of his, a very amusing young fellow and not so serious-minded as Philip, but a bit of a fop maybe. And thee preferred the fop to the serious-minded. I didn't prefer anybody, but Henry Brierly was good company, which Philip wasn't always. Did thee know thee father had been in correspondence with Philip? Ruth looked up surprised and with a plain question in her eyes. Oh, it's not about thee. What then? And if there was any shade of disappointment in her tone, probably Ruth herself did not know it. It's about some land up in the country. That man Bigler has got father into another speculation. That odious man, why will father have anything to do with him? Is it that railroad? Yes, father advanced money and took land as security, and whatever has gone with the money and the bonds, he has on his hands a large tract of wild land. And what has Philip to do with that? It has good timber, if it could ever be got out, and father says that there must be coal in it, It's in a coal region. He wants Philip to survey it and examine it for indications of coal. It's another of father's fortunes, I suppose, said Ruth. He has put away so many fortunes for us that I'm afraid we never shall find them. Ruth was interested in it nevertheless, and perhaps mainly because Philip was to be connected with the enterprise. Mr. Bigler came to dinner with her father next day and talked a great deal about Mr. Bolton's magnificent tract of land, extolled the sagacity that led him to secure such a property, and led the talk along to another railroad which would open a northern communication to this very land. Pennebaker says it's full of coal, he's no doubt of it, and a railroad to strike the Erie would make it a fortune. Suppose you take the land and work the thing up, Mr. Bigler, you may have the tract for $3 an acre. You'd throw it away then, replied Mr. Bigler, and I'm not the man to take advantage of a friend, but if you'll put a mortgage on it for the northern road, I wouldn't mind taking an interest if Pennebaker is willing, but Pennebaker, you know, don't go much on land, he sticks to the legislature. And Mr. Bigler laughed. When Mr. Bigler had gone, Ruth asked her father about Philip's connection with the land scheme. There's nothing definite, said Mr. Bolton. Philip is showing aptitude for his profession. I hear the best reports of him in New York, though those sharpers don't intend to do anything but use him. I've written and offered him employment in surveying and examining the land. We want to know what it is, and if there is anything in it that his enterprise can dig out, he shall have an interest. I should be glad to give the young fellow a lift. All his life Eli Bolton had been giving young fellows a lift and shouldering the losses when things turned out unfortunately. His ledger, take it all together, would not show a balance on the right side, but perhaps the losses on his books will turn out to be credits in a world where accounts are kept on a different basis. The left hand of the ledger will appear the right, looked at from the other side. Philip wrote to Ruth rather a comical account of the bursting up of the city of Napoleon and the navigation improvement scheme, of Harry's flight and the Colonel's discomfiture. Harry left in such a hurry that he hadn't even time to bid Miss Laura Hawkins goodbye, but he had no doubt that Harry would console himself with the next pretty face he saw, a remark which was thrown in for Ruth's benefit. Carl Sellers had in all probability, by this time, some other equally brilliant speculation in his brain. As to the railroad, Philip had made up his mind that it was merely kept on foot for speculative purposes in Wall Street, and he was about to quit it. Would Ruth be glad to hear, he wondered, that he was coming east? For he was coming, in spite of a letter from Harry in New York, advising him to hold on until he had made some arrangements in regard to contracts. He to be a little careful about Sellers, who was somewhat visionary, Harry said. The summer went on, without much excitement for Ruth. She kept up a correspondence with Alice, who promised a visit in the fall. She read. She earnestly tried to interest herself in home affairs and such people as came to the house, but she found herself falling more and more into reveries and growing weary of things as they were. She felt that everybody might become in time like two relatives from a Shaker establishment in Ohio, who visited the Boltons about this time, a father and son, clad exactly alike and alike in manners. The son, however, who was not of age, was more unworldly and sanctimonious than his father. He always addressed his parent as Brother Plum, and bore himself, altogether in such a superior manner that Ruth longed to put bent pins in his chair. Both father and son wore the long, single-breasted collarless coats of their society, without buttons before or behind, but with a row of hooks and eyes on either side in front. It was Ruth's suggestion that the coats would be improved by a single hook, and eye sewed on in the small of the back, where the buttons usually are. Amusing as this Shaker caricature of the Friends was, it oppressed Ruth beyond measure, and increased her feeling of being stifled. It was a most unreasonable feeling. No home could be pleasanter than Ruth's. The house, a little out of the city, was one of those elegant country residences which so much charm visitors to the suburbs of Philadelphia. A modern dwelling and luxurious in everything that wealth could suggest for comfort, it stood in the midst of exquisitely kept lawns, with groups of trees, parterres of flowers massed in colors, with greenhouse, grapery, and garden, and on one side the garden sloped away in undulations to a shallow brook that ran over a pebbly bottom and sang under forest trees. The country about was the perfection of cultivated landscape, dotted with cottages and stately mansions of revolutionary date, and sweet as an English countryside, whether seen in the soft bloom of May or in the mellow ripeness of late October. It needed only the peace of the mind within to make it a paradise. One riding by on the old Germantown road and seeing a young girl swinging in the hammock on the piazza and intent upon some volume of old poetry or the latest novel would no doubt have envied a life so idyllic. He could not have imagined that the young girl was reading a volume of reports of clinics and longing to be elsewhere. Ruth could not have been more discontented if all the wealth about her had been as unsubstantial as a dream. Perhaps she so thought it. "I feel," she once said to her father, "as if I were living in a house of cards. And thee would like to turn it into a hospital." "No, but tell me, father," continued Ruth, not to be put off, "is thee still going on with that Bigler and those other men who come here and entice thee?" Mr. Bolton smiled, as men do when they talk with women about business. "Such men have their uses, Ruth. They keep the world active, and I owe a great many of my best operations to such men. Who knows, Ruth, but this new land purchase, which I confess I yielded a little too much to Bigler in, may not turn out a fortune for thee and the rest of the children." "Ah, father, thee sees everything in a rose-colored light. I do believe thee wouldn't have so readily allowed me to begin the study of medicine if it hadn't had the novelty of an experiment to thee." "And is thee satisfied with it?" "If thee means if I have had enough of it, no. I just begin to see what I can do in it, and what a noble profession it is for a woman. Would thee have me sit here like a bird on a bough and wait for somebody to come and put me in a cage?" Mr. Bolton was not sorry to divert the talk from his own affairs, and he did not think it worthwhile to tell his family of a performance that very day which was entirely characteristic of him. Ruth might well say that she felt as if she were living in a house of cards, although the Bolton household had no idea of the number of perils that hovered over them, any more than thousands of families in America have of the business risks and contingencies upon which their prosperity and luxury hang. A sudden call upon Mr. Bolton for a large sum of money, which must be forthcoming at once, had found him in the midst of a dozen ventures, from no one of which a dollar could be realized. It was in vain that he applied to his business acquaintances and friends. It was a period of sudden panic and no money. "100,000, Mr. Bolton," said Plumley. "Good God, if you should ask me for 10, I shouldn't know where to get it." And yet that day Mr. Small, Pennybacker, Bigler and Small came to Mr. Bolton with a piteous story of ruin in a coal operation if he could not raise $10,000. Only 10, and he was sure of a fortune. Without it, he was a beggar. Mr. Bolton had already Small's notes for a large amount in his safe, labeled doubtful. He had helped him again, and always with the same result. But Mr. Small spoke with a faltering voice of his family, his daughter in school, his wife ignorant of his calamity, and drew such a picture of their agony that Mr. Bolton put by his own more pressing necessity and devoted the day to scraping together, here and there, $10,000 for this brazen beggar, who had never kept a promise to him nor paid a debt. Beautiful credit, the foundation of modern society. Who shall say that this is not the golden age of mutual trust, of unlimited reliance upon human promises? That is a peculiar condition of society which enables a whole nation to instantly recognize point and meaning in the familiar newspaper anecdote, which puts into the mouth of a distinguished speculator in lands and mines this remark: "I wasn't worth a cent 2 years ago, and now I owe $2 million." Chapter 27. It was a hard blow to poor Sellers to see the work on his darling enterprise stop, and the noise and bustle and confusion that had been such refreshment to his soul sicken and die out. It was hard to come down to humdrum, ordinary life again after being a general superintendent and the most conspicuous man in the community. It was sad to see his name disappear from the newspapers, sadder still to see it resurrected at intervals, shorn of its aforetime gaudy gear of compliments and clothed on with rhetorical tar and feathers. But his friends suffered more on his account than he did. He was a cork that could not be kept under the water many moments at a time. He had to bolster up his wife's spirits every now and then. On one of these occasions he said, "It's all right, my dear, all right. It will all come right in a little while. There's $200,000 coming, and that will set things booming again. Harry seems to be having some difficulty, but that's to be expected. You can't move these big operations to the tune of Fisher's hornpipe, you know, but Harry will get it started along presently, and then you'll see. I expect the news every day now." "But Beriah, you've been expecting it every day, all along, haven't you?" "Well, yes, I don't know, but I have. But anyway, the longer it's delayed, the nearer it grows to the time when it will start. Same as every day you live brings you nearer to nearer." "The grave." "Well, no, not that exactly, but you can't understand these things, Polly dear. Women haven't much head for business, you know. You make yourself perfectly comfortable, old lady, and you'll see how we'll trot this right along. Why, bless you, let the appropriation lag. If it wants to, that's no great matter. There's a bigger thing than that." "Bigger than $200,000, Beriah." "Bigger, child? Why, what's $200,000? Pocket money, mere pocket money. Look at the railroad. Did you forget the railroad? It ain't many months till spring. It will be coming right along, and the railroad swimming right along behind it. Where'll it be by the middle of summer? Just stop and fancy a moment. Just think a little, don't anything suggest itself. Bless your heart, you dear women live right in the present all the time. But a man, why, a man lives in the future, Beriah. But don't we live in the future most too much, Beriah? We do somehow seem to manage to live on next year's crop of corn and potatoes as a general thing, while this year is still dragging along. But sometimes it's not a robust diet, Beriah. But don't look that way, dear. Don't mind what I say. I don't mean to fret, I don't mean to worry, and I don't once a month, do I, dear? But when I get a little low and feel bad, I get a bit troubled and worrisome, but it don't mean anything in the world. It passes right away. I know you're doing all you can, and I don't want to seem repining and ungrateful, for I'm not, Beriah. You know I'm not, don't you? Lord bless you, child. I know you are the very best little woman that ever lived on the whole face of the earth. And I know that I would be a dog not to work for you and think for you and scheme for you with all my might. And I'll bring things all right yet, honey. Cheer up and don't you fear. The railroad. Oh, I had forgotten the railroad, dear, but when a body gets blue, a body forgets everything. Yes, the railroad, tell me about the railroad. Aha, my girl, don't you see? Things ain't so dark, are they? Now I didn't forget the railroad. Now just think for a moment, just figure up a little on the future dead moral certainties. For instance, call this waiter St. Louis. And we'll lay this fork, representing the railroad, from St. Louis to this potato, which is Slouchburg. Then with this carving knife, we'll continue the railroad from Slouchburg to Doodleville, shown by the black pepper. Then we run along the comb to the tumbler, that's Brimstone. Thence by the pipe to Belshazzar, which is the salt cellar. Thence to that quill, Catfish, hand me the pincushion, Marie Antoinette. Thence right along these shears to this horse, Babylon. Then by the spoon to Bloody Run, thank you, the ink. Thence to Hail Columbia, Snuffers, Polly, please move that cup and saucer close up, that's Hail Columbia. Then let me open my knife, to Hark from the Tomb, where we'll put the candlestick, only a little distance from Hail Columbia to Hark from the Tomb, downgrade all the way. And there we strike Columbus River, pass me 2 or 3 skeins of thread to stand for the river, the sugar bowl will do for Hawkeye, and the rat trap for Stone's Landing, Napoleon, I mean, and you can see how much better Napoleon is located than Hawkeye. Now here you are with your railroad complete, and showing its continuation to Hallelujah, and thence to Corruptionville. Now then, there you are. It's a beautiful road, beautiful. Jeff Thompson can out-engineer any civil engineer that ever sighted through an aneroid, or a theodolite, or whatever they call it. He calls it sometimes one, and sometimes the other, just whichever levels off his sentence neatest, I reckon. But ain't it a ripping road, though? I tell you, it'll make a stir when it gets along. Just see what a country it goes through. There's your onions at Slouchburg, noblest onion country that graces God's footstool. And there's your turnip country all around Doodleville. Bless my life. What fortunes are going to be made there when they get that contrivance perfected for extracting olive oil out of turnips, if there's any in them. And I reckon there is, because Congress has made an appropriation of money to test the thing, and they wouldn't have done that just on conjecture, of course. And now we come to the Brimstone region, cattle raised there till you can't rest, and corn and all that sort of thing. Then you've got a little stretch along through Belshazzar that don't produce anything now, at least nothing but rocks, but irrigation will fetch it. Then from Catfish to Babylon it's a little swampy, but there's dead loads of peat down under there somewhere. Next is the Bloody Run and Hail Columbia country. Tobacco enough can be raised there to support 2 such railroads. Next is the Sarsaparilla region. I reckon there's enough of that truck along in there on the line of the pocket knife, from Hail Columbia to Hark from the Tomb, to fat up all the consumptives in all the hospitals from Halifax to the Holy Land. It just grows like weeds. I've got a little belt of sarsaparilla land in there just tucked away unobtrusively waiting for my little universal expectorant to get into shape in my head. And I'll fix that, you know. One of these days I'll have all the nations of the earth expecto. But Beriah, dear. Don't interrupt me, Polly. I don't want you to lose the run of the map. Well, take your toy horse, James Fitzjames, if you must have it, and run along with you. Here, now the soap will do for Babylon. Let me see, where was I? Oh yes, now we run down to Stone's Land, Napoleon. Now we run down to Napoleon. Beautiful road. Look at that now, perfectly straight line, straight as the way to the grave. And see where it leaves Hawkeye, clear out in the cold, my dear, clear out in the cold. That town, is bound to die as, well, if I owned it I'd get its obituary ready now and notify the mourners. Polly, mark my words, in 3 years from this, Hawk'll be a howling wilderness. You'll see. And just look at that river, noblest stream that meanders over the thirsty earth. Calmest, gentlest artery that refreshes her weary bosom. Railroad goes all over it and all through it, wades right along on stilts. 17 bridges in 3 miles and a half. 49 bridges from Hark from the Tomb to Stone's Landing altogether. 49 bridges. And culverts enough to culvert creation itself. Hadn't skeins of thread enough to represent them all, but you get an idea. Perfect trestlework of bridges for 72 miles. Jeff Thompson and I fixed all that, you know. He's to get the contracts, and I'm to put them through on the divide. Just oceans of money in those bridges. It's the only part of the railroad I'm interested in, down along the line, and it's all I want, too. It's enough, I should judge. Now here we are at Napoleon. Good enough country, plenty good enough. All it wants is population. That's all right, that will come. And it's no bad country now for calmness and solitude, I can tell you, though there's no money in that, of course. No money, but a man wants rest, a man wants peace, a man don't want to rip and tear around all the time. And here we go now, just as straight as a string for hallelujah. It's a beautiful angle, handsome upgrade all the way, and then away you go to Corruptionville, the gaudiest country for early carrots and cauliflowers that ever, good missionary field, too. There ain't such another missionary field outside the jungles of Central Africa. And patriotic, why they named it after Congress itself. Oh, I warn you, my dear, there's a good time coming, and it'll be right along before you know what you're about too. That railroad, fetching it. You see what it is as far as I've got. And if I had enough bottles and soap and bootjacks and such things to carry it along to where it joins onto the Union Pacific, 1,400 miles from here, I should exhibit to you in that little internal improvement. Spectacle of inconceivable sublimity. So, don't you see, we've got the railroad to fall back on, and in the meantime, what are we worrying about that $200,000 appropriation for? That's all right. I'd be willing to bet anything that the very next letter that comes from Harry will. The eldest boy entered just in the nick of time and brought a letter, warm from the post office. Things do look bright, after all, Beriah. I'm sorry I was blue, but it did seem as if everything had been going against us for whole ages. Open the letter, open it quick, and let's know all about it before we stir out of our places. I am all in a fidget to know what it says. The letter was opened without any unnecessary delay. Chapter 28. Whatever may have been the language of Harry's letter to the Colonel, the information it conveyed was condensed or expanded, one or the other, from the following episode of his visit to New York. He called with official importance in his mien at No. Wall Street, where a great gilt sign betokened the presence of the headquarters of the Columbus River Slackwater Navigation Company. He entered and gave a dressy porter his card and was requested to wait a moment in a sort of anteroom. The porter returned in a minute and asked whom he would like to see. The president of the company, of course. He is busy with some gentlemen, sir, says he will be done with them directly. That a copperplate card with engineer-in-chief on it should be received with such tranquility as this annoyed Mr. Brierly not a little, but he had to submit. Indeed, his annoyance had time to augment a good deal, for he was allowed to cool his heels a full half-hour in the anteroom before those gentlemen emerged, and he was ushered into the presence. He found a stately dignitary occupying a very official chair behind a long green morocco-covered table, in a room sumptuously carpeted and furnished, and well garnished with pictures. "Good morning, sir. Take a seat, take a seat." "Thank you, sir," said Harry, throwing as much chill into his manner as his ruffled dignity prompted. "We perceive by your reports and the reports of the chief superintendent that you have been making gratifying progress with the work. We are all very much pleased. Indeed, we did not discover it from your letters, which we have not received, nor by the treatment our drafts have met with, which were not honored, nor by the reception of any part of the appropriation, no part of it having come to hand. Why, my dear Mr. Brierly, there must be some mistake. I am sure we wrote you and also Mr. Sellers recently. When my clerk comes, he will show copies, letters informing you of the 10% assessment." "Oh, certainly, we got those letters, but what we wanted was money to carry on the work, money to pay the men." "Certainly, certainly, true enough, but we credited you both for a large part of your assessments. I am sure that was in our letters." "Of course that was in, I remember that." "Ah, very well then, now we begin to understand each other." "Well, I don't see that we do. There's 2 months' wages due the men, and—" "How haven't you paid the men?" "Paid them? How are we going to pay them when you don't honor our drafts?" "Why, my dear sir, I cannot see how you can find any fault with us. I am sure we have acted in a perfectly straightforward business way. Now let us look at the thing a moment. You subscribed for 100 shares of the capital stock at $1,000 a share, I believe." "Yes, sir, I did." "And Mr. Sellers took a like amount." "Yes, sir." "Very well, no concern can get along without money. We levied a 10% assessment. It was the original understanding that you and Mr. Sellers were to have the positions you now hold, with salaries of $600 a month each, while in active service. You were duly elected to these places, and you accepted them. Am I right?" "Certainly." "Very well, you were given your instructions and put to work. By your reports it appears that you have expended the sum of $9,610 upon the said work. 2 months' salary to you 2 officers amounts altogether to $2,400, about 1/8 of your 10% assessment, you see, which leaves you in debt to the company for the other 7/8 of the assessment, viz., something over $8,000 apiece. Now, instead of requiring you to forward this aggregate of $16,000 or $17,000 to New York, the company voted unanimously to let you pay it over to the contractors, laborers from time to time, and give you credit on the books for it. And they did it without a murmur, too, for they were pleased with the progress you had made, and were glad to pay you that little compliment, and a very neat one it was, too, I am sure. The work you did fell short of $10,000, a trifle. Let me see, $9,640 from $20,000, salary $2,400 added. Ah yes, the balance due the company from yourself and Mr. Sellers is $7,960, which I will take the responsibility of allowing to stand for the present, unless you prefer to draw a check now and thus. Confound it, do you mean to say that instead of the company owing us $2,400, we owe the company $7,960? Well, yes. And that we owe the men and the contractors nearly $10,000 besides. Owe them, oh bless my soul, You can't mean that you have not paid these people. But I do mean it. The president rose and walked the floor like a man in bodily pain. His brows contracted, he put his hand up and clasped his forehead and kept saying, "Oh, it is too bad, too bad, too bad. Oh, it is bound to be found out. Nothing can prevent it, nothing." Then he threw himself into his chair and said, "My dear Mr. Brierson, this is dreadful, perfectly dreadful. It will be found out. It is bound to tarnish the good name of the company. Our credit will be seriously, most seriously impaired. How could you be so thoughtless? The men ought to have been paid, though it beggared us all." "They ought they? Then why the devil? My name is not Brierson. By the way, why the mischief didn't the compare? Why, what in the nation ever became of the appropriation? Where is that appropriation? If a stockholder may make so bold as to ask." "The appropriation? That paltry $200,000, do you mean?" "Of course, but I didn't know that $200,000 was so very paltry, though I grant, of course, that it is not a large sum, strictly speaking. But where is it?" "My dear sir, you surprise me. You surely cannot have had a large acquaintance with this sort of thing. Otherwise, you would not have expected much of a result from a mere initial appropriation like that. It was never intended for anything but a mere nest egg for the future and real appropriations to cluster around." "Indeed, well, was it a myth or was it a reality? Whatever become of it?" "Why, the matter is simple enough. A congressional appropriation costs money. Just reflect, for instance, a majority of the House committee, say $10,000 apiece, $40,000. A majority of the Senate committee, the same each, say $40,000. A little extra to one or two chairmen of one or two such committees, say $10,000. Each $20,000, and there's $100,000 of the money gone to begin with. Then 7 male lobbyists at $3,000 each, $21,000. One female lobbyist, $10,000. A high moral congressman or senator here and there. The high moral ones cost more because they give tone to a measure. Say 10 of these at $3,000 each is $30,000. Then a lot of small fry country members who won't vote for anything whatever without pay, say 20 at $500 apiece, is $10,000. A lot of dinners to members, say $10,000 altogether. Lot of gimcracks for congressmen's wives and children. Those go a long way. You can't spend too much money in that line. Well, those things cost in a lump, say $10,000, along there somewhere. And then comes your printed documents, your maps, your tinted engravings, your pamphlets, your illuminated show cards, your advertisements in 150 papers at ever so much a line. Because you've got to keep the papers all right, or you are gone up. You know, oh my dear sir, printing bills are destruction itself. Ours so far amount to, let me see, 10, 52, 22, 13, and then there's 11, 14, 33, well, never mind the details, the total in clean numbers foots up $118,254, $42 thus far. What? Oh yes, indeed. Printing's no bagatelle, I can tell you. And then there's your contributions, as a company, to Chicago fires and Boston fires, and orphan asylums and all that sort of thing. Head the list, you see, with the company's full name and $1,000 set opposite. Great card, sir, one of the finest advertisements in the world. The preachers mention it in the pulpit when it's a religious charity. One of the happiest advertisements in the world is your benevolent donation. Ours have amounted to $16,000 and some cents up to this time. Good heavens! Oh yes, perhaps the biggest thing we've done in the advertising line was to get an officer of the U.S. government, of perfectly Himalayan official altitude, to write up our little internal improvement for a religious paper of enormous circulation. I tell you, that makes our bonds go handsomely among the pious poor. Your religious paper is by far the best vehicle for a thing of this kind, because they'll lead your article and put it right in the midst of the reading matter. And if it's got a few scripture quotations in it, and some temperance platitudes, and a bit of gush here and there about Sunday schools, and a sentimental snuffle now and then about God's precious ones, the honest, hard-handed poor, it works the nation like charm, my dear sir, and never a man suspects that it is an advertisement. But your secular paper sticks you right into the advertising columns, and of course you don't take a trick. Give me a religious paper to advertise in every time, and if you'll just look at their advertising pages, you'll observe that other people think a good deal as I do, especially people who have got little financial schemes to make everybody rich with. Of course, I mean your great big metropolitan religious papers that know how to serve God and make money at the same time. That's your sort, sir, that's your sort. A religious paper that isn't run to make money is no use to us, sir, as an advertising medium, no use to anybody in our line of business. I guess our next best dodge was sending a pleasure trip of newspaper reporters out to Napoleon. Never paid them a cent, just filled them up with champagne and the fat of the land, put pen, ink, and paper before them while they were red-hot. And bless your soul, when you come to read their letters, you'd have supposed they'd been to heaven. And if a sentimental squeamishness held one or two of them back from taking a less rosy view of Napoleon, our hospitalities tied his tongue at least, and he said nothing at all, and so did us no harm. Let me see, have I stated all the expenses I've been at? No, I was near forgetting one or two items. There's your official salaries. You can't get good men for nothing. Salaries cost pretty lively. And then there's your big high-sounding millionaire names stuck into your advertisements as stockholders. Another card, and they are stockholders too, but you have to give them the stock and non-assessable at that, so they're an expensive lot. Very, very expensive thing, take it all around, is a big internal improvement concern. But you see that yourself, Mr. Briarman, you see that yourself, sir. But look here, I think you are a little mistaken about its ever having cost anything for congressional votes. I happen to know something about that. I've let you say your say, now let me say mine. I don't wish to seem to throw any suspicion on anybody's statements, because we are all liable to be mistaken. But how would it strike you if I were to say that I was in Washington all the time this bill was pending? And what if I added that I put the measure through myself? Yes, sir, I did that little thing. And moreover, I never paid $1 for any man's vote and never promised one. There are some ways of doing a thing that are as good as others which other people don't happen to think about, or don't have the knack of succeeding in if they do happen to think of them. My dear sir, I am obliged to knock some of your expenses in the head, for never a cent was paid a congressman or senator on the part of this navigation company. The president smiled blandly, even sweetly, all through this harangue, and then said, "Is that so? Every word of it? Well, it does seem to alter the complexion of things a little. You are acquainted with the members down there, of course, else you could not have worked to such advantage." "I know them all, sir. I know their wives, their children, their babies. I even made it a point to be on good terms with their lackeys. I know every congressman well, even familiarly." "Very good. Do you know any of their signatures? Do you know their handwriting?" "Why, I know their handwriting as well as I know my own, have had correspondence enough with them, I should think. And their signatures, why, I can tell their initials, even." The president went to a private safe, unlocked it, and got out some letters and certain slips of paper. Then he said, "Now here, for instance, do you believe that that is a genuine letter? Do you know this signature here? And this one? Do you know who those initials represent, and are they forgeries?" Harry was stupefied. There were things there that made his brain swim. Presently, at the bottom of one of the letters, he saw a signature that restored his equilibrium. It even brought the sunshine of a smile to his face. The president said, "That one amuses you. You never suspected him." "Of course I ought to have suspected him, but I don't believe it ever really occurred to me." "Well, well, well, how did you ever have the nerve to approach him, of all others?" "Why, my friend, we never think of accomplishing anything without his help. He is our mainstay. But how do those letters strike you?" "They strike me dumb. What a stone-blind idiot I have been." "Well, take it all around, I suppose you had a pleasant time in Washington," said the president, gathering up the letters. "Of course you must have had. Very few men could go there and get a money bill through without buying a single." "Come now, Mr. President, that's plenty of that. I take back everything I said on that head. I'm a wiser man today than I was yesterday, I can tell you. I think you are. In fact, I am satisfied you are. But now I showed you these things in confidence, you understand. Mention facts as much as you want to, but don't mention names to anybody. I can depend on you for that, can't I? Oh, of course, I understand the necessity of that. I will not betray the names. But to go back a bit, it begins to look as if you never saw any of that appropriation at all. We saw nearly $10,000 of it, and that was all. Several of us took turns at log rolling in Washington, and if we had charged anything for that service, none of that $10,000 would ever have reached New York. If you hadn't levied the assessment, you would have been in a close place, I judge. Close, have you figured up the total of the disbursements I told you of? No, I didn't think of that. Well, let's see. Spent in Washington, say, $191,000. Printing, advertising, etc., say $118,000. Charity, say, $16,000. Total, $325,000. The money to do that with comes from appropriation, $200,000. 10% assessment on capital of $1,100,000. Total, $300,000. Which leaves us in debt some $25,000 at this moment. Salaries of home officers are still going on, also printing and advertising. Next month will show a state of things. And then burst up, I suppose. By no means, levy another assessment. Oh, I see, that's dismal. By no means. Why isn't it? What's the road out? Another appropriation, don't you see? Bother the appropriations, they cost more than they come to. Not the next one, we'll call for $500,000, get it and go for $1 million the very next month. Yes, but the cost of it. The president smiled and patted his secret letters affectionately. He said, all these people are in the next Congress, we shan't have to pay them a cent, and what is more, they will work like beavers for us, perhaps it might be to their advantage. Harry reflected profoundly a while, then he said, we send many missionaries to lift up the benighted races of other lands. How much cheaper and better it would be if those people could only come here and drink of our civilization at its fountain head. I perfectly agree with you, Mr. Beverly. Must you go? Well, good morning. Look in when you are passing, and whenever I can give you any information about our affairs and prospects, I shall be glad to do it. Harry's letter was not a long one, but it contained at least the calamitous figures that came out in the above conversation. The colonel found himself in a rather uncomfortable place, no $1,200 salary forthcoming, and himself held responsible for half of the $9,640 due the workmen, to say nothing of being in debt to the company to the extent of nearly $4,000. Polly's heart was nearly broken. The blues returned in fearful force, and she had to go out of the room to hide the tears that nothing could keep back now. There was mourning in another quarter, too, for Louise had a letter. Washington had refused, at the last moment, to take $40,000 for the Tennessee land and had demanded $150,000. So the trade fell through, and now Washington was wailing because he had been so foolish. But he wrote that his man might probably return to the city soon, and then he meant to sell to him, sure, even if he had to take $10,000. Louise had a good cry, several of them, indeed, and the family charitably forbore to make any comments that would increase her grief. Spring blossomed, summer came, dragged its hot weeks by, and the colonel's spirits rose day by day, for the railroad was making good progress. But by and by something happened. Hawkeye had always declined to subscribe anything toward the railway, imagining that her large business would be a sufficient compulsory influence. But now Hawkeye was frightened, and before Carl Sellers knew what he was about, Hawkeye, in a panic, had rushed to the front and subscribed such a sum that Napoleon's attractions suddenly sank into insignificance, and the railroad concluded to follow a comparatively straight course, instead of going miles out of its way to build up a metropolis in the muddy desert of Stone's Landing. The thunderbolt fell, after all the Colonel's deep planning, after all his brain work and tongue work in drawing public attention to his pet project and enlisting interest in it, after all his faithful hard toil with his hands and running hither and thither on his busy feet, after all his high hopes and splendid prophecies, the fates had turned their backs on him at last, and all in a moment his air castles crumbled to ruins about him. Hawkeye rose from her fright triumphant and rejoicing, and down went Stone's Landing. One by one, its meager parcel of inhabitants packed up and moved away as the summer waned and fall approached. Town lots were no longer saleable, traffic ceased, a deadly lethargy fell upon the place once more, the weekly telegraph faded into an early grave, the wary tadpole returned from exile, the bullfrog resumed his ancient song, the tranquil turtle sunned his back upon bank and log, and drowsed his grateful life away as in the old sweet days of yore. Chapter 29. Philip Sterling was on his way to Ilium in the state of Pennsylvania. Ilium was the railway station nearest to the tract of wild land which Mr. Bolton had commissioned him to examine. On the last day of the journey, as the railway train Philip was on was leaving a large city, a lady timidly entered the drawing-room car and hesitatingly took a chair that was at the moment unoccupied. Philip saw from the window that a gentleman had put her upon the car just as it was starting. In a few moments, the conductor entered, and without waiting an explanation, said roughly to the lady, "Now you can't sit there, that seat's taken, go into the other car." "I did not intend to take the seat," said the lady, rising. "I only sat down a moment till the conductor should come and give me a seat." "There ain't any, car's full, you'll have to leave." "But sir," said the lady appealingly, "I thought." "Can't help what you thought, you must go into the other car." "The train is going very fast, let me stand here till we stop." "The lady can have my seat," cried Philip, springing up. The conductor turned towards Philip, and coolly and deliberately surveyed him from head to foot, with contempt in every line of his face, turned his back upon him without a word, and said to the lady, "Come, I've got no time to talk, you must go now." The lady, entirely disconcerted by such rudeness and frightened, moved towards the door, opened it, and stepped out. The train was swinging along at a rapid rate, jarring from side to side. The step was a long one between the cars, and there was no protecting grating. The lady attempted it, but lost her balance in the wind and the motion of the car and fell. She would inevitably have gone down under the wheels if Philip, who had swiftly followed her, had not caught her arm and drawn her up. He then assisted her across, found her a seat, received her bewildered thanks, and returned to his car. The conductor was still there, taking his tickets and growling something about imposition. Philip marched up to him and burst out with, "You are a brute, an infernal brute, to treat a woman that way." "Perhaps you'd like to make a fuss about it," sneered the conductor. Philip's reply was a blow, given so suddenly and planted so squarely in the conductor's face that it sent him reeling over a fat passenger, who was looking up in mild wonder that anyone should dare to dispute with a conductor and against the side of the car. He recovered himself, reached the bell rope, "Damn you, I'll learn you," stepped to the door and called a couple of brakemen, and then, as the speed slackened, roared out, "Get off this train." "I shall not get off, I have as much right here as you." "We'll see," said the conductor, advancing with the brakemen. The passengers protested, and some of them said to each other, "That's too bad," as they always do in such cases, but none of them offered to take a hand with Philip. The men seized him, wrenched him from his seat, dragged him along the aisle, tearing his clothes, thrust him from the car, and then flung his carpet-bag, overcoat, and umbrella after him. And the train went on. The conductor, red in the face and puffing from his exertion, swaggered through the car, muttering, "Puppy, I'll learn him." The passengers, when he had gone, were loud in their indignation and talked about signing a protest, but they did nothing more than talk. The next morning, the Hooverville Patriot and Clarion had this item: "Slightly overboard." We learn that as the down noon express was leaving yesterday a lady, God save the mark, attempted to force herself into the already full palatial car. Conductor Slum, who is too old a bird to be caught with chaff, courteously informed her that the car was full, and when she insisted on remaining, he persuaded her to go into the car where she belonged. Thereupon a young sprig from the east blustered like a Shanghai rooster and began to sass the conductor with his chin music. That gentleman delivered the young aspirant for a muss one of his elegant little left-handers, which so astonished him that he began to feel for his shooter. Whereupon Mr. Slum gently raised the youth, carried him forth, and set him down just outside the car to cool off. Whether the young blood has yet made his way out of Bascom's swamp, we have not learned. Conductor Slum is one of the most gentlemanly and efficient officers on the road, but he ain't trifled with, not much. We learn that the company have put a new engine on the 7 o'clock train and newly upholstered the drawing-room car throughout. It spares no effort for the comfort of the traveling public. Philip never had been before in Bascom's swamp, and there was nothing inviting in it to detain him. After the train got out of the way, he crawled out of the briars and the mud and got upon the track. He was somewhat bruised, but he was too angry to mind that. He plodded along over the ties in a very hot condition of mind and body. In the scuffle, his railway check had disappeared, and he grimly wondered, as he noticed the loss, if the company would permit him to walk over their track if they should know he hadn't a ticket. Philip had to walk some 5 miles before he reached a little station where he could wait for a train, and he had ample time for reflection. At first, he was full of vengeance on the company. He would sue it. He would make it pay roundly. But then it occurred to him that he did not know the name of a witness he could summon, and that a personal fight against a railway corporation was about the most hopeless in the world. He then thought he would seek out that conductor, lie in wait for him at some station, and thrash him or get thrashed himself. But as he got cooler, that did not seem to him a project worthy of a gentleman exactly. Was it possible for a gentleman to get even with such a fellow as that conductor on the letter's own plane? And when he came to this point, he began to ask himself if he had not acted very much like a fool. He didn't regret striking the fellow. He hoped he had left a mark on him. But after all, was that the best way? Here was he, Philip Sterling, calling himself a gentleman in a brawl with a vulgar conductor about a woman he had never seen before. Why should he have put himself in such a ridiculous position? Wasn't it enough to have offered the lady his seat, to have rescued her from an accident, perhaps from death? Suppose he had simply said to the conductor, "Sir, your conduct is brutal, I shall report you." The passengers who saw the affair might have joined in a report against the conductor, and he might really have accomplished something. And now, Philip looked at his torn clothes and thought with disgust of his haste in getting into a fight with such an autocrat. At the little station where Philip waited for the next train, he met a man who turned out to be a justice of the peace in that neighborhood and told him his adventure. He was a kindly sort of man and seemed very much interested. Said he, when he had heard the story. "Do you think anything can be done, sir?" "Well, I guess 'tain't no use. I hain't a mite of doubt of every word you say, but suing's no use. The railroad company owns all these people along here, and the judges on the bench too. Spiled your clothes, while least said soonest mended. You hain't no chance with the company." When next morning he read the humorous account in the Patriot and Clarion, he saw still more clearly what chance he would have had before the public in a fight with the railroad company. Still, Philip's conscience told him that it was his plain duty to carry the matter into the courts, even with the certainty of defeat. He confessed that neither he nor any citizen had a right to consult his own feelings or conscience in a case where a law of the land had been violated before his own eyes. He confessed that every citizen's first duty in such case is to put aside his own business and devote his time and his best efforts to seeing that the infraction is promptly punished. And he knew that no country can be well governed unless its citizens as a body keep religiously before their minds that they are the guardians of the law, and that the law officers are only the machinery for its execution, nothing more. As a finality, he was obliged to confess that he was a bad citizen, and also that the general laxity of the time, and the absence of a sense of duty toward any part of the community but the individual himself were ingrained in him, and he was no better than the rest of the people. The result of this little adventure was that Philip did not reach Ilium till daylight the next morning, when he descended sleepy and sore from a way train and looked about him. Ilium was in a narrow mountain gorge, through which a rapid stream ran. It consisted of the plank platform on which he stood, a wooden house, half-painted, with a dirty piazza unroofed in front, and a signboard hung on a slanting pole, bearing the legend, Hotel P. Dusenheimer, a sawmill further down the stream, a blacksmith shop and a store, and 3 or 4 unpainted dwellings of the slab variety. As Philip approached the hotel, he saw what appeared to be a wild beast crouching on the piazza. It did not stir, however, and he soon found that it was only a stuffed skin. This cheerful invitation to the tavern was the remains of a huge panther which had been killed in the region a few weeks before. Philip examined his ugly visage and strong, crooked forearm as he was waiting admittance, having pounded upon the door. "Yait a bit, I'll shoost, put on my trousers," shouted a voice from the window, and the door was soon opened by the yawning landlord. Morgan didn't hear D. Drain answered, "Dem boys jeeps me up so spate, gom right in." Philip was shown into a dirty bar-room. It was a small room with a stove in the middle, set in a long shallow box of sand, for the benefit of the spitters, a bar across one end, a mere counter with a sliding glass case behind it containing a few bottles having ambitious labels, and a wash sink in one corner. On the walls were the bright yellow and black handbills of a traveling circus, with pictures of acrobats in human pyramids, horses flying in long leaps through the air, and sylph-like women in a paradisaic costume, balancing themselves upon the tips of their toes on the bare backs of frantic and plunging steeds, and kissing their hands to the spectators meanwhile. As Philip did not desire a room at that hour, he was invited to wash himself at the nasty sink, a feat somewhat easier than drying his face, for the towel that hung in a roller over the sink was evidently as much a fixture as the sink itself, and belonged, like the suspended brush and comb, to the traveling public. Philip managed to complete his toilet by the use of his pocket handkerchief, and declining the hospitality of the landlord implied in the remark, "You one dake notin," he went into the open air to wait for breakfast. The country he saw was wild but not picturesque. The mountain before him might be 800 feet high and was only a portion of a long unbroken range, savagely wooded, which followed the stream. Behind the hotel and across the brawling brook was another level-topped, wooded range exactly like it. Ilium itself, seen at a glance, was old enough to be dilapidated, and if it had gained anything by being made a wood and water station of the new railroad, it was only a new sort of grime and rawness. P. Dusenheimer, standing in the door of his uninviting groggery when the trains stopped for water, never received from the traveling public any patronage except facetious remarks upon his personal appearance. Perhaps 1,000 times he had heard the remark, "Ilium fuit," followed in most instances by a hail to himself as a Ennias, with the inquiry where is old Anchises. At first he had replied, "Dere ain't no such man," but irritated by its senseless repetition, he had latterly dropped into the formula of, "You be damn." Philip was recalled from the contemplation of Ilium by the rolling and growling of the gong within the hotel, the din and clamor increasing till the house was apparently unable to contain it, when it burst out of the front door and informed the world that breakfast was on the table. The dining room was long, low, and narrow, and a narrow table extended its whole length. Upon this was spread a cloth which from appearance might have been as long in use as the towel in the barroom. Upon the table was the usual service, the heavy, much-nicked stoneware, the row of plated and rusty casters, the sugar bowls with the zinc teaspoons sticking up in them, the piles of yellow biscuits, the discouraged-looking plates of butter. The landlord waited, and Philip was pleased to observe the change in his manner. In the barroom he was the conciliatory landlord. Standing behind his guests at table, he had an air of peremptory patronage, and the voice in which he shot out the inquiry as he seized Philip's plate, beefsteak or liver, quite took away Philip's power of choice. He begged for a glass of milk, after trying that green-hued compound called coffee, and made his breakfast out of that, and some hard crackers, which seemed to have been imported into Ilium before the introduction of the iron horse, and to have withstood a 10-year siege of regular boarders, Greeks, and others. The land that Philip had come to look at was at least 5 miles distant from Ilium station. A corner of it touched the railroad, but the rest was pretty much an unbroken wilderness, 8 or 10,000 acres of rough country, most of it such a mountain range as he saw at Ilium. His first step was to hire 3 woodsmen to accompany him. By their help, he built a log hut and established a camp on the land, and then began his explorations, mapping down his survey as he went along, noting the timber and the lay of the land, and making superficial observations as to the prospect of coal. The landlord at Ilium endeavored to persuade Philip to hire the services of a witch-hazel professor of that region, who could walk over the land with his wand and tell him infallibly whether it contained coal, and exactly where the strata ran. But Philip preferred to trust to his own study of the country and his knowledge of the geological formation. He spent a month in traveling over the land and making calculations, and made up his mind that a fine vein of coal ran through the mountain about a mile from the railroad, and that the place to run in a tunnel was halfway towards its summit. Acting with his usual promptness, Philip, with the consent of Mr. Bolton, broke ground there at once, and before snow came, had some rude buildings up, and was ready for active operations in the spring. It was true that there were no outcroppings of coal at the place, and the people at Ilium said he might as well dig for plug tobacco there. But Philip had great faith in the uniformity of nature's operations in ages past, and he had no doubt that he should strike at this spot the rich vein that had made the fortune of the Golden Briar Company. Chapter 30. Once more Louise had good news from her Washington. Senator Dilworthy was going to sell the Tennessee land to the government. Louise told Laura in confidence. She had told her parents, too, and also several bosom friends, but all of these people had simply looked sad when they heard the news, except Laura. Laura's face suddenly brightened under it, only for an instant, it is true, but poor Louise was grateful for even that fleeting ray of encouragement. When next Laura was alone, she fell into a train of thought something like this. If the senator has really taken hold of this matter, I may look for that invitation to his house at any moment. I am perishing to go. I do long to know whether I am only simply a large-sized pygmy among these pygmies here, who tumble over so easily when one strikes them, or whether I am really. Her thoughts drifted into other channels for a season. Then she continued, he said I could be useful in the great cause of philanthropy and help in the blessed work of uplifting the poor and the ignorant if he found it feasible to take hold of our land. Well, that is neither here nor there. What I want is to go to Washington and find out what I am. I want money too, and if one may judge by what she hears, there are chances there for a fascinating woman, she was going to say perhaps, but she did not. Along in the fall the invitation came, sure enough. It came officially through Brother Washington, the private secretary, who appended a postscript that was brimming with delight over the prospect of seeing the Duchess again. He said it would be happiness enough to look upon her face once more. It would be almost too much happiness when to it was added the fact that she would bring messages with her that were fresh from Louise's lips. In Washington's letter were several important enclosures. For instance, there was the senator's check for $2,000 to buy suitable clothing in New York with. It was a loan to be refunded when the land was sold. $2,000, this was fine indeed. Louise's father was called Rich, but Laura doubted if Louise had ever had $400 worth of new clothing at one time in her life. With the check came 2 through tickets, good on the railroad from Hawkeye to Washington via New York, and they were deadhead tickets, too, which had been given to Senator Dilworthy by the railway companies. Senators and representatives were paid thousands of dollars by the government for traveling expenses, but they always traveled deadhead both ways, and then did as any honorable, high-minded men would naturally do, declined to receive the mileage tendered them by the government. The senator had plenty of railway passes and could easily spare 2 to Laura, 1 for herself and 1 for a male escort. Washington suggested that she get some old friend of the family to come with her, and said the senator would deadhead him home again as soon as he had grown tired of the sights of the capital. Laura thought the thing over. At first she was pleased with the idea, but presently she began to feel differently about it. Finally she said, "No, our staid, steady-going Hawkeye friends' notions and mine differ about some things. They respect me now, and I respect them. Better leave it so. I will go alone. I am not afraid to travel by myself." And so, communing with herself, she left the house for an afternoon walk. Almost at the door, she met Carl Sellers. She told him about her invitation to Washington. "Bless me," said the colonel, "I have about made up my mind to go there myself. You see, we've got to get another appropriation through, and the company want me to come east and put it through Congress. Harry's there, and he'll do what he can, of course. And Harry's a good fellow and always does the very best he knows how. But then he's young, rather young for some parts of such work, you know, and besides he talks too much, talks a good deal too much. And sometimes he appears to be a little bit visionary, too. I think the worst thing in the world for a businessman. A man like that always exposes his cards sooner or later. This sort of thing wants an old, quiet, steady hand, wants an old, cool head, you know, that knows men through and through and is used to large operations. I'm expecting my salary and also some dividends from the company, and if they get along in time, I'll go along with you, Laura. Take you under my wing. You mustn't travel alone. Lord, I wish I had the money right now. But there'll be plenty soon, plenty." Laura reasoned with herself that if the kindly, simple-hearted colonel was going anyhow, what could she gain by traveling alone and throwing away his company? So she told him she accepted his offer gladly, gratefully. She said it would be the greatest of favors if he would go with her and protect her, not at his own expense as far as railway fares were concerned, of course. She could not expect him to put himself to so much trouble for her and pay his fare besides. But he wouldn't hear of her paying his fare. It would be only a pleasure to him to serve her. Laura insisted on furnishing the tickets, and finally, when argument failed, she said the tickets cost neither her nor anyone else a cent. She had 2 of them, she needed but one, and if he would not take the other, she would not go with him. That settled the matter. He took the ticket. Laura was glad that she had the check for new clothing, for she felt very certain of being able to get the colonel to borrow a little of the money to pay hotel bills with here and there. She wrote Washington to look for her and Carl Sellers toward the end of November, and at about the time set, the 2 travelers arrived safe in the capital of the nation, sure enough. Chapter 31. She, the gracious lady, yet no pains did spare, to do him ease, or do him remedy, many restoratives of virtues rare, and costly cordials she did apply, to mitigate his stubborn malady. Spenser's Fairy Queens. Mr. Henry Brierly was exceedingly busy in New York, so he wrote Carl Sellers, but he would drop everything and go to Washington. The colonel believed that Harry was the prince of lobbyists, a little too sanguine, maybe, and given to speculation, but then he knew everybody. The Columbus River navigation scheme was got through almost entirely by his aid. He was needed now to help through another scheme, a benevolent scheme in which Carl Sellers, through the Hawkinses, had a deep interest. "I don't care, you know," he wrote to Harry, "so much about the Negroes, but if the government will buy this land, it will set up the Hawkins family, make Laura an heiress, and I shouldn't wonder if Beriah Sellers would set up his carriage again. Dilworthy looks at it different, of course. He's all for philanthropy, for benefiting the colored race. There's old Balsam, was in the interior, used to be the Rev. Orson Balsam of Iowa. He's made the riffle on the Injun, great Injun pacificator and land dealer. Ballama got the Injun to himself, and I suppose that Senator Dilworthy feels that there is nothing left him but the colored man. I do reckon he is the best friend the colored man has got in Washington." Though Harry was in a hurry to reach Washington, he stopped in Philadelphia and prolonged his visit day after day, greatly to the detriment of his business, both in New York and Washington. The society at the Boltons might have been a valid excuse for neglecting business much more important than his. Philip was there. He was a partner with Mr. Bolton now in the new coal venture, concerning which there was much to be arranged in preparation for the spring work, and Philip lingered week after week in the hospitable house. Alice was making a winter visit. Ruth only went to town twice a week to attend lectures, and the household was quite to Mr. Bolton's taste, for he liked the cheer of company and something going on evenings. Harry was cordially asked to bring his traveling bag there, and he did not need urging to do so. Not even the thought of seeing Laura at the Capitol made him restless in the society of the two young ladies. Two birds in hand are worth one in the bush, certainly. Philip was at home. He sometimes wished he were not so much so. He felt that too much or not enough was taken for granted. Ruth had met him, when he first came, with a cordial frankness, and her manner continued entirely unrestrained. She neither sought his company nor avoided it, and this perfectly level treatment irritated him more than any other could have done. It was impossible to advance much in love-making with one who offered no obstacles, had no concealments and no embarrassments, and whom any approach to sentimentality would be quite likely to set into a fit of laughter. "Why, Phil," she would say, "what puts you in the dumps today? You are as solemn as the upper bench in meeting. I shall have to call Alice to raise your spirits. My presence seems to depress you." "It's not your presence, but your absence when you are present," began Philip dolefully, with the idea that he was saying a rather deep thing. "But you won't understand me." "No, I confess I cannot. If you really are so low as to think I am absent when I am present, it's a frightful case of aberration. I shall ask Father to bring out Dr. Jackson. Does Alice appear to be present when she is absent?" "Alice has some human feeling anyway. She cares for something besides musty books and dry bones. I think, Ruth, when I die," said Philip, intending to be very grim and sarcastic, "I'll leave you my skeleton. You might like that." "It might be more cheerful than you are at times," Ruth replied with a laugh, "but you mustn't do it without consulting Alice. She might not like it." "I don't know why you should bring Alice up on every occasion. Do you think I am in love with her?" "Bless you, no, it never entered my head. Are you? The thought of Philip Sterling in love is too comical. I thought you were only in love with the Ilium coal mine, which you and Father talk about half the time." This is a specimen of Philip's wooing. Confound the girl, he would say to himself. Why does she never tease Harry and that young Shepley who comes here? How differently Alice treated him. She at least never mocked him, and it was a relief to talk with one who had some sympathy with him. And he did talk to her by the hour about Ruth. The blundering fellow poured all his doubts and anxieties into her ear, as if she had been the impassive occupant of one of those little wooden confessionals in the cathedral on Logan Square. Has a confessor, if she is young and pretty, any feeling? Does it mend the matter by calling her your sister? Philip called Alice his good sister and talked to her about love and marriage, meaning Ruth, as if sisters could by no possibility have any personal concern in such things. Did Ruth ever speak of him? Did she think Ruth cared for him? Did Ruth care for anybody at Falkhill? Did she care for anything except her profession? And so on. Alice was loyal to Ruth, and if she knew anything, she did not betray her friend. She did not, at any rate, give Philip too much encouragement. What woman, under the circumstances, would? "I can tell you one thing, Philip," she said. "If ever Ruth Bolton loves, it will be with her whole soul, in a depth of passion that will sweep everything before it and surprise even herself." A remark that did not much console Philip, who imagined that only some grand heroism could unlock the sweetness of such a heart, and Philip feared that he wasn't a hero. He did not know out of what materials a woman can construct a hero when she is in the creative mood. Harry skipped into this society with his usual lightness and gaiety. His good nature was inexhaustible, and though he liked to relate his own exploits, he had a little tact in adapting himself to the tastes of his hearers. He was not long in finding out that Alice liked to hear about Philip, and Harry launched out into the career of his friend in the West, with a prodigality of invention that would have astonished the chief actor. He was the most generous fellow in the world, and picturesque conversation was the one thing in which he never was bankrupt. With Mr. Bolton, he was the serious man of business, enjoying the confidence of many of the moneyed men in New York, whom Mr. Bolton knew and engaged with them in railway schemes and government contracts. Philip, who had so long known Harry, never could make up his mind that Harry did not himself believe that he was a chief actor in all these large operations of which he talked so much. Harry did not neglect to endeavor to make himself agreeable to Mrs. Bolton by paying great attention to the children and by professing the warmest interest in the Friends' faith. It always seemed to him the most peaceful religion. He thought it must be much easier to live by an internal light than by a lot of outward rules. He had a dear Quaker aunt in Providence of whom Mrs. Bolton constantly reminded him. He insisted upon going with Mrs. Bolton and the children to the Friends meeting on first day, when Ruth and Alice and Philip, world's people, went to a church in town, and he sat through the hour of silence with his hat on in most exemplary patience. In short, this amazing actor succeeded so well with Mrs. Bolton that she said to Philip one day, "Thy friend, Henry Brierly, appears to be a very worldly-minded young man. Does he believe in anything?" "Oh, yes," said Philip, laughing. "He believes in more things than any other person I ever saw." To Ruth, Harry seemed to be very congenial. He was never moody for one thing, but lent himself with alacrity to whatever her fancy was. He was gay or grave, as the need might be. No one apparently could enter more fully into her plans for an independent career. "My father," said Harry, "was bred a physician and practiced a little before he went into Wall Street. I always had a leaning to the study. There was a skeleton hanging in the closet of my father's study when I was a boy that I used to dress up in old clothes. Oh, I got quite familiar with the human frame." "You must have," said Philip. "Was that where you learned to play the bones? He is a master of those musical instruments, Ruth. He plays well enough to go on the stage." "Philip hates science of any kind and steady application," retorted Harry. He didn't fancy Philip's banter, and when the latter had gone out and Ruth asked, "Why don't you take up medicine, Mr. Brierly?" Harry said, "I have it in mind. I believe I would begin attending lectures this winter if it weren't for being wanted in Washington. But medicine is particularly women's province." "Why so?" asked Ruth, rather amused. "Well, the treatment of disease is a good deal a matter of sympathy. A woman's intuition is better than a man's. Nobody knows anything, really, you know, and a woman can guess a good deal nearer than a man." "You are very complimentary to my sex." "But," said Harry frankly, "I should want to choose my doctor. An ugly woman would ruin me. The disease would be sure to strike in and kill me at sight of her. I think a pretty physician, with engaging manners, would coax a fellow to live through almost anything." "I am afraid you are a scoffer, Mr. Brierly." "On the contrary, I am quite sincere. Wasn't it old what's-his-name that said only the beautiful is useful?" Whether Ruth was anything more than diverted with Harry's company, Philip could not determine. He scorned at any rate to advance his own interest by any disparaging communications about Harry, both because he could not help liking the fellow himself, and because he may have known that he could not more surely create a sympathy for him in Ruth's mind. That Ruth was in no danger of any serious impression he felt pretty sure, felt certain of it when he reflected upon her severe occupation with her profession. "Hang it," he would say to himself, "she is nothing but pure intellect anyway," and he only felt uncertain of it when she was in one of her moods of raillery with mocking mischief in her eyes. At such times, she seemed to prefer Harry's society to his. When Philip was miserable about this, he always took refuge with Alice, who was never moody and who generally laughed him out of his sentimental nonsense. He felt at his ease with Alice and was never in want of something to talk about, and he could not account for the fact that he was so often dull with Ruth, with whom, of all persons in the world, he wanted to appear at his best. Harry was entirely satisfied with his own situation. A bird of passage is always at its ease, having no house to build and no responsibility. He talked freely with Philip about Ruth, an almighty fine girl, he said, but what the deuce she wanted to study medicine for, he couldn't see. There was a concert one night at the Musical Fund Hall, and the four had arranged to go in and return by the Germantown cars. It was Philip's plan, who had engaged the seats, and promised himself an evening with Ruth, walking with her, sitting by her in the hall, and enjoying the feeling of protecting that a man always has of a woman in a public place. He was fond of music, too, in a sympathetic way. At least, he knew that Ruth's delight in it would be enough for him. Perhaps he meant to take advantage of the occasion to say some very serious things. His love for Ruth was no secret to Mrs. Bolton, and he felt almost sure that he should have no opposition in the family. Mrs. Bolton had been cautious in what she said, but Philip inferred everything from her reply to his own questions. One day, "Has thee ever spoken thy mind to Ruth?" Why shouldn't he speak his mind and end his doubts? Ruth had been more tricksy than usual that day, and in a flow of spirits quite inconsistent, it would seem, in a young lady devoted to grave studies. Had Ruth a premonition of Philip's intention in his manner? It may be, for when the girls came downstairs, ready to walk to the cars, and met Philip and Harry in the hall, Ruth said, laughing, "The two tallest must walk together," and before Philip knew how it happened, Ruth had taken Harry's arm, and his evening was spoiled. He had too much politeness and good sense and kindness to show in his manner that he was hit. So he said to Harry, "That's your disadvantage in being short." And he gave Alice no reason to feel during the evening that she would not have been his first choice for the excursion. But he was none the less chagrined, and not a little angry at the turn the affair took. The hall was crowded with the fashion of the town. The concert was one of those fragmentary drearinesses that people endure because they are fashionable, tour de force on the piano, and fragments from operas, which have no meaning without the setting, with weary pauses of waiting between. There is the comic bass who is so amusing and on such familiar terms with the audience, and always sings the barber, the attitudinizing tenor with his languishing "Oh, summer night," the soprano with her batty, who warbles and trills and runs and fetches her breath, and ends with a noble scream that brings down a tempest of applause, in the midst of which she backs off the stage smiling and bowing. It was this sort of concert, and Philip was thinking that it was the most stupid one he ever sat through, when just as the soprano was in the midst of that touching ballad, "Carmen, throw the rye." The soprano always sings "Carmen, throw the rye" on an encore. The Black Swan used to make it irresistible. Philip remembered with her arch, "If a body kiss a body, there was a cry of fire." The hall is long and narrow, and there is only one place of egress. Instantly the audience was on its feet, and a rush began for the door. Men shouted, women screamed, and panic seized the swaying mass. A second's thought would have convinced everyone that getting out was impossible, and that the only effect of a rush would be to crash people to death. But a second's thought was not given. A few cried, sit down," but the mass was turned towards the door. Women were down and trampled on in the aisles, and stout men, utterly lost to self-control, were mounting the benches, as if to run a race over the mass to the entrance. Philip, who had forced the girls to keep their seats, saw, in a flash, the new danger, and sprang to avert it. In a second more, those infuriated men would be over the benches and crushing Ruth and Alice under their boots. He leaped upon the bench in front of them and struck out before him with all his might, felling one man who was rushing on him and checking for an instant the movement, or rather parting it, and causing it to flow on either side of him. But it was only for an instant. The pressure behind was too great, and the next Philip was dashed backwards over the seat. And yet that instant of arrest had probably saved the girls, for as Philip fell, the orchestra struck up Yankee Doodle in the liveliest manner. The familiar tune caught the ear of the mass, which paused in wonder and gave the conductor's voice a chance to be heard. "It's a false alarm." The tumult was over in a minute, and the next, laughter was heard, and not a few said, "I knew it wasn't anything. What fools people are at such a time." The concert was over, however. A good many people were hurt, some of them seriously, and among them Philip Sterling was found bent across the seat, insensible, with his left arm hanging limp and a bleeding wound on his head. When he was carried into the air, he revived and said it was nothing. A surgeon was called, and it was thought best to drive at once to the Boltons, the surgeon supporting Philip, who did not speak the whole way. His arm was set and his head dressed, and the surgeon said he would come round all right in his mind by morning. He was very weak. Alice, who was not much frightened while the panic lasted in the hall, was very much unnerved by seeing Philip so pale and bloody. Ruth assisted the surgeon with the utmost coolness and with skillful hands helped to dress Philip's wounds. And there was a certain intentness and fierce energy in what she did that might have revealed something to Philip if he had been in his senses. But he was not, or he would not have murmured, "Let Alice do it, she is not too tall." It was Ruth's first case. Chapter 32. Washington's delight in his beautiful sister was measureless. He said that she had always been the queenliest creature in the land, but that she was only commonplace before, compared to what she was now. So extraordinary was the improvement wrought by rich, fashionable attire. But your criticisms are too full of brotherly partiality to be depended on, Washington. Other people will judge differently. Indeed they won't, you'll see. There will never be a woman in Washington that can compare with you. You'll be famous within a fortnight, Laura. Everybody will want to know you. You wait, you'll see. Laura wished in her heart that the prophecy might come true, and privately she even believed it might, for she had brought all the women whom she had seen since she left home under sharp inspection, and the result had not been unsatisfactory to her. During a week or two, Washington drove about the city every day with her and familiarized her with all of its salient features. She was beginning to feel very much at home with the town itself, and she was also fast acquiring ease with the distinguished people she met at the Dilworthy table, and losing what little of country timidity she had brought with her from Hawkeye. She noticed with secret pleasure the little start of admiration that always manifested itself in the faces of the guests when she entered the drawing-room arrayed in evening costume. She took comforting note of the fact that these guests directed a very liberal share of their conversation toward her. She observed with surprise that famous statesmen and soldiers did not talk like gods as a general thing, but said rather commonplace things for the most part. And she was filled with gratification to discover that she, on the contrary, was making a good many shrewd speeches, and now and then a really brilliant one, and furthermore, that they were beginning to be repeated in social circles about the town. Congress began its sittings, and every day or two Washington escorted her to the galleries set apart for lady members of the households of senators and representatives. Here was a larger field and a wider competition, but still she saw that many eyes were uplifted toward her face, and that first one person and then another called a neighbor's attention to her. She was not too dull to perceive that the speeches of some of the younger statesmen were delivered about as much, and perhaps more at her, than to the presiding officer. And she was not sorry to see that the dapper young senator from Iowa came at once and stood in the open space before the president's desk to exhibit his feat as soon as she entered the gallery, whereas she had early learned from common report that his usual custom was to prop them on his desk and enjoy them himself with a selfish disregard of other people's longings. Invitations began to flow in upon her, and soon she was fairly in society. The season was now in full bloom, and the first select reception was at hand, that is to say, a reception confined to invited guests. Senator Dilworthy had become well convinced, by this time, that his judgment of the country-bred Missouri girl had not deceived him. It was plain that she was going to be a peerless missionary in the field of labor he designed her for, and therefore it would be perfectly safe, and likewise judicious, to send her forth well panoplied for her work. So he had added new and still richer costumes to her wardrobe, and assisted their attractions with costly jewelry, loans on the future land sale. This first select reception took place at a cabinet minister's, or rather a cabinet secretary's mansion. When Laura and the senator arrived, about 9:30 or 10 in the evening, the place was already pretty well crowded, and the white-gloved Negro servant at the door was still receiving streams of guests. The drawing rooms were brilliant with gaslight and as hot as ovens. The host and hostess stood just within the door of entrance. Laura was presented, and then she passed on into the maelstrom of bejeweled and richly attired low-necked ladies and white kid-gloved and steel-pen-coated gentlemen, and wherever she moved she was followed by a buzz of admiration that was grateful to all her senses, so grateful indeed that her white face was tinged and its beauty heightened by a perceptible suffusion of color. She caught such remarks as, "Who is she? Superb woman, that is the new beauty from the West," etc., etc. Whenever she halted, she was presently surrounded by ministers, generals, congressmen, and all manner of aristocratic people. Introductions followed, and then the usual original question, "How do you like Washington, Miss Hawkins?" Supplemented by that other usual original question, "Is this your first visit?" These two exciting topics being exhausted, conversation generally drifted into calmer channels, only to be interrupted at frequent intervals by new introductions and new inquiries as to how Laura liked the capital and whether it was her first visit or not. And thus for an hour or more, the Duchess moved through the crush in a rapture of happiness, for her doubts were dead and gone. Now she knew she could conquer here. A familiar face appeared in the midst of the multitude, and Harry Brierly fought his difficult way to her side, his eyes shouting their gratification, so to speak. "Oh, this is a happiness. Tell me, my dear Miss Hawkins." I know what you are going to ask. I do like Washington. I like it ever so much." "No, but I was going to ask." "Yes, I am coming to it as fast as I can. It is my first visit. I think you should know that yourself." And straightway, a wave of the crowd swept her beyond his reach. Now what can the girl mean? Of course she likes Washington. I'm not such a dummy as to have to ask her that. And as to its being her first visit, why bang it, she knows that I knew it was. Does she think I have turned idiot? Curious girl anyway. But how they do swarm about her. She is the reigning belle of Washington after this night. She'll know 500 of the heaviest guns in the town before this night's nonsense is over. And this isn't even the beginning. Just as I used to say, she'll be a card in the matter of, yes, sir. She shall turn the men's heads, and I'll turn the women's. What a team that will be in politics here. I wouldn't take $250,000 for what I can do in this present session. No, indeed I wouldn't. Now, here, I don't altogether like this. That insignificant Secretary of Legation is, why, she's smiling on him as if he and now on the Admiral. Now she's illuminating that stuffy congressman from Massachusetts, vulgar, ungrammatical shovel-maker, greasy knave of spades. I don't like this sort of thing. She doesn't appear to be much distressed about me. She hasn't looked this way once. All right, my bird of paradise, if it suits you, go on. But I think I know your sex. I'll go to smiling around a little too and see what effect that will have on you.